Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Nightmare Narratives. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Jackson Wolf, but everyone calls me Jack. I've been a ranger in George Washington National Forest for 15 years now, and I thought I'd seen everything these Virginia mountains could throw at me. Bears, wild boar, the occasional mountain lion that wandered down from up north, even found a few illegal stills back in the deep woods where the old-timers still make their corn liquor. But nothing prepared me for what I found that August morning in 1977. The call came in at dawn. Family of campers up on Black Rock Ridge reported a bear attack. Their campsite was torn apart, they said, food scattered everywhere, tent shredded. The father, a man named Thompson, sounded shaken on the radio, said they barely made it to their truck in time. "Thing was huge," he kept saying. "Biggest damn bear I ever saw." I loaded my truck with the usual gear, tranquilizer gun, first aid kit, tracking equipment. The plan was simple. Find the bear, assess if it was sick or just hungry from the drought we'd been having, then relocate it deeper into the forest. We'd had 6 weeks without rain, and the animals were getting desperate for food and water. The drive up to Black Rock Ridge took 2 hours on winding mountain roads. Pine trees pressed close on both sides, their needles brown and brittle from the heat. It was already 80 degrees at 7 in the morning, and the weatherman promised it would hit 95 again. When I finally reached the campsite, the first thing that hit me was the smell. Not the usual garbage and rotting food smell you get with bear problems. This was something else, something wild and musky, like wet fur mixed with something I couldn't name. The Thompson family had already packed up and left, but the damage they described was real enough. Their tent looked like it had been put through a wood chipper, sleeping bags torn to pieces, cooler smashed open, canned goods scattered across 50 yards of forest floor. But here's what bothered me right from the start. There were no bear signs, no scat, no claw marks on the trees, no hair caught on branches. Bears are messy eaters, and they leave evidence everywhere. This site was destroyed, but it was clean destruction, almost like something had been careful not to leave traces. Then I found the first track. It was pressed deep into a patch of soft mud near the creek, about 30 yards from where the tent had been. At first glance, it looked almost human. 5 toes, a heel, an arch. But it was 18 inches long and 8 inches wide. The toes had left gouges in the earth like claw marks. I knelt down and studied it closer. The print was fresh, maybe 6 hours old. Whatever made it was heavy, had to be, to press that deep into hard-packed mud. But the shape was all wrong for a bear. Bears have longer claws, different toe spacing. Their hind feet don't look anything like this. I followed the track line and found 2 more prints. Then nothing. The trail just stopped at a rocky outcrop, like whatever made it had simply vanished into thin air. That's when I noticed how quiet the forest had become. No birds singing, no squirrels chattering. Even the insects had gone silent. In 15 years of ranger work, I'd learned that when the forest goes completely quiet, it means something is very wrong. I pulled out my radio to call back to headquarters, but all I got was static. Not unusual up here in the mountains, but it added to the feeling that something was off. The air felt thick and heavy, not just from the heat. There was a pressure to it, like the moment before a thunderstorm, except the sky was clear. I decided to follow the creek downstream, looking for more signs. The water was running low from the drought, just a trickle between the rocks. Perfect conditions for tracking since animals would have to come here to drink. That's when I found the second set of prints. These were different. Smaller, but still wrong somehow. They led from the water's edge up toward a stand of old oak trees. I followed them, my rifle ready even though I wasn't sure what I was tracking anymore. The trail led to a tree that stopped me cold. An old oak, probably 100 years old, with claw marks carved deep into the bark. But these weren't bear claws. They were too high up, starting about 12 feet off the ground and going up another 6 feet. Whatever made them was either incredibly tall or could climb like nothing I'd ever seen. The marks were fresh. Sap was still bleeding from the gouges, sticky and amber in the morning sun. The cuts were precise, evenly spaced, almost like they'd been made on purpose, like something was marking its territory. I backed away from the tree and tried the radio again. Still nothing but static. The sun was getting higher, and the temperature was climbing fast. Sweat was running down my back, but there was a chill running up my spine that had nothing to do with the weather. That's when I heard it for the first time. A sound I'd never heard before in all my years in these mountains. Not quite a howl, not quite a scream. Something in between that made every hair on my arms stand up. It echoed off the ridges, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Whatever had destroyed that campsite, it wasn't a bear. And it was still out there. The sound came again 20 minutes later, closer this time. I was following what looked like a game trail through a thick stand of mountain laurel when the howl scream cut through the morning air like a knife. It was coming from maybe a quarter-mile ahead, up toward the ridgeline. I stopped and listened, trying to place the direction. In Vietnam, I'd learned to read sounds the way other people read books. A snapping twig could mean the difference between living and dying. But this sound didn't fit any category I knew. It was too intelligent for an animal, too wild for a human. I check. Ed my equipment. Rifle loaded, safety off. Tranquilizer gun ready. Radio still dead. I had about 6 hours of water and enough supplies for 2 days if I had to stay overnight. The smart thing would have been to head back to the truck and report what I'd found. Instead, I kept following the trail. The path wound upward through dense forest, getting steeper with each step. Pine and oak gave way to mountain ash and wild cherry. The air was thinner up here and somehow felt cleaner despite the oppressive heat. But that pressure was still there, that feeling of being watched. Every few hundred yards, I found another sign, a footprint in soft earth, branches broken at heights no bear could reach, rocks arranged in patterns that looked almost like markers or warnings. Then I found the bones. They were arranged in a circle about 10 feet across, right in the middle of the trail where I couldn't miss them. Deer bones mostly, but some I couldn't identify. They'd been picked clean and bleached white by the sun. But what bothered me wasn't the bones themselves. It was how they were arranged. The pattern was too neat, too deliberate. Like someone or something had placed each bone carefully, creating a design that hurt to look at. The bones formed shapes that almost made sense, but not quite, like trying to remember a dream after you wake up. I stepped around the circle, not wanting to disturb it, and kept climbing. The trail was getting harder to follow. Sometimes it would vanish completely for 100 yards, then pick up again like whatever made it could fly. That's when I realized I was being followed. It started as just a feeling, the kind of itch between your shoulder blades that means someone's watching you. In the war, we called it sniper sense. Your body knows when it's in crosshairs before your brain does. I stopped and listened. Nothing. But when I started walking again, and I heard it, a soft sound like footsteps about 50 yards behind me. When I stopped, the footsteps stopped. When I moved, they moved. I tried an old trick from my tracking days. I walked, normally for about 20 steps, then suddenly dropped behind a fallen log and waited. If something was following me, it would either stop too quickly or keep moving and give itself away. What I heard instead was silence. Complete, total silence. No footsteps. No breathing. No sound at all. Like whatever had been following me had simply vanished. Then I felt hot breath on the back of my neck. I spun around, rifle ready, but there was nothing there. Just empty forest and dancing shadows. But the feeling lingered, that sensation of something large and alive standing right behind me, close enough to touch. My hands were shaking as I checked the area. No tracks, no bent grass, no sign that anything had been there at all. But I could still smell that musky scent, stronger now, wild and ancient, like something that had never been civilized. I was being hunted. The realization hit me like cold water. For 15 years, I'd been the one doing the tracking. I'd followed wounded bears, tracked lost hikers, hunted down problem animals, I was the predator in these mountains. But now something had turned the tables. Something was tracking me with skills that made my own look clumsy. It knew where I was going before I did. It was studying me, learning my patterns, figuring out how I moved and thought. The trail ahead split into 3 paths. I studied the ground, looking for signs of which way to go. That's when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. My own footprints were there in the soft earth, clear as day, but they were facing the wrong direction. According to the tracks, I had walked up this path an hour ago before I'd ever been here. The prints were fresh, maybe 30 minutes old. But that was impossible. I'd never been on this part of the mountain before in my life, unless something else was making tracks that looked exactly like my boots. I knelt down and studied. The prints closer. Same size as my feet, same tread pattern, same scuff mark on the left heel where I'd scraped against a rock the week before. They were perfect copies of my tracks, but they led up the middle path toward the ridge. It was a trap. It had to be. Something was trying to lead me somewhere specific, using my own tracks as bait. But what kind of animal could do that? What kind of animal was smart enough to copy human footprints? The answer, I was starting to realize, was no animal at all. I chose the left path instead, the one without my fake footprints. It led through a stand of dead trees, their branches reaching toward the sky like skeletal fingers. The drought had killed them, but they were still standing, creating a maze of gray wood and deep shadows. That's where it tried to ambush me. I was halfway through the dead forest when I heard branches breaking above me. I looked up just in time to see something massive moving through the treetops, flowing from branch to branch like water. It was there for maybe 2 seconds before it vanished, but I got a clear look. It was shaped like a man, but bigger, much bigger, maybe 10 feet tall, covered in dark fur. Its arms were too long, its shoulders too wide, and its eyes, even from 50 feet up I could see its eyes. They were amber-colored and intelligent, watching me with an expression I'd seen before on the faces of enemy soldiers. It was deciding whether to kill me. I dove behind a fallen trunk just as something heavy crashed down where I'd been standing. Wood splintered. Dust flew. When I looked up, there was a crater in the ground shaped like a massive fist, but whatever made it was already gone. The forest had gone completely silent again. Not even the sound of my own breathing seemed to carry. I was alone in a maze of dead trees with something that could move through the treetops like a spider and hit the ground hard enough to shatter stone. And it was playing with me. I stayed behind that fallen log for what felt like hours, but was probably only 10 minutes. My heart was hammering so hard, I was sure the thing could hear it. Every shadow looked like movement. Every creaking branch sounded like footsteps, but nothing happened. Whatever was up there, it was waiting, watching, learning. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I had to move. Staying in one place was a death trap. In Vietnam, we called it becoming a target. I counted to 3, then rolled to my left and came up running. Nothing followed me. At least, nothing I could see. I made it through the dead forest and up onto a rocky ledge that gave me a clear view of the valley below. From here, I could see for miles. The forest spread out like a green carpet, broken only by the silver line of the creek and a few bare patches where the drought had hit hardest. But what caught my attention was the pattern. Looking down from above, I could see paths through the forest that weren't visible from ground level. They formed a rough circle maybe 5 miles across, with the spot where I was standing right in the center. It looked like a territory boundary, marked as clearly as if someone had drawn it on a map, and I was right in the middle of it. I pulled out my binoculars and scanned the tree line. At first, I didn't see anything unusual. Then something moved near the creek, about 2 miles south. Something big and dark that walked upright for a few steps before dropping to all fours and disappearing into the underbrush. There was more than one of them. The radio crackled to life suddenly, making me jump. "Base to Ranger 7. Come in, Ranger 7. The voice was Chief Morrison from headquarters, probably wondering why I hadn't checked in. "Ranger 7 here," I said, keeping my voice low. "I'm tracking the problem bear on Black Rock Ridge." "Any luck?" The Thompson family filed a complaint. Want to make sure this gets handled properly." I almost told him the truth. Almost said that there was no bear, that something else was living up here, something that shouldn't exist. But who would believe that? "Still tracking," I said instead. "Might need to stay overnight. Radio reception is spotty up here." "Copy that. Check in tomorrow morning. And Jack, be careful. Something's got the local folks spooked. We've had 3 more reports of unusual animal behavior in the past week." The radio went dead again. I was on my own. I spent the next 2 hours working my way around the perimeter of what I was starting to think of as their territory. Every few hundred yards, I found more signs: trees marked with claw gouges, rock cairns that looked like primitive altars, and bones, always bones, arranged in patterns that made my eyes hurt to follow. But the most disturbing discovery was the cave. I found it on the north face of the ridge, hidden behind a curtain of dead vines. The opening was about 8 feet high and perfectly round, like it had been carved rather than formed naturally. The smell coming from inside was overwhelming, that same musky scent I'd been tracking, but concentrated until it was almost visible. I switched on my flashlight and peered inside. The beam revealed a tunnel that went back about 30 feet before opening into a larger chamber. The walls were smooth stone, but they weren't natural. Someone or something had worked them, carved them into shapes that almost looked like writing. And there were more bones. Lots more bones. They lined the walls of the tunnel like decorations. Some were old, bleached white and crumbling. Others were fresh enough that I could still smell the decay. Most looked like deer and smaller animals, but some were different, longer, more delicate. I was pretty sure some of them had been human once. That's when I heard breathing behind me. I spun around, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. Nothing there, but the breathing continued. Slow and deep and much too close. It was coming from inside the cave, from the chamber I hadn't explored yet. Something was home. I backed away from the cave entrance, trying to keep my movements slow and non-threatening. Whatever was in there, I didn't want to meet it in a confined space. In the tunnels of Vietnam, close quarters fighting was brutal and usually fatal. Out here in the open, at least I had room to run. The breathing stopped. In the sudden silence, I heard something else. Footsteps, multiple sets, coming from different directions. They were surrounding me. I found a defensive position behind a cluster of boulders and waited. The footsteps got closer, but I still couldn't see anything. It was like being hunted by ghosts. Then one of them made a mistake. A shadow moved wrong against the trees, and for just a moment I saw it clearly. It was crouched about 50 yards away, partially hidden behind a pine tree, man-shaped but wrong in every detail. Too tall, too wide, covered in dark fur that seemed to shift and flow in the light. Its face was almost human except for the eyes, which reflected my flashlight beam like an animal's. It was watching me with the patience of a predator that had all the time in the world. I raised my rifle and aimed at center mass. The creature didn't move. It just kept watching, like it was curious about what I would do, like it was studying human behavior. I almost pulled the trigger. My finger was on it, taking up slack, when something stopped me. Maybe it was the intelligence in those amber eyes. Maybe it was the way it held itself, like a soldier at rest rather than an animal ready to attack. Or maybe it was the fact that 3 more of them had appeared while I was focused on the first one. They had me surrounded. One to the north, one to the south, one to the east, and the original one to the west. All of them crouched and waiting, all of them watching me with those unsettling eyes. But none of them were attacking. "What do you want?" I said out loud, feeling foolish but desperate to break the tension. The yawn. To the west tilted its head, like it was considering the question. Then it stood up. Standing, it was at least 10 feet tall. Its arms hung almost to its knees, ending in hands that looked human, except for the claws. Its face was a mixture of ape and man, with intelligent eyes set deep under a heavy brow. When it opened its mouth, I could see teeth that were definitely not human. But it didn't attack. Instead, it raised one massive hand and pointed back the way I'd come, back toward my truck, back toward the world of highways and ranger stations and things that made sense. It was telling me to leave. This is your territory, I said, understanding finally dawning. You've been trying to scare me off, not kill me. The creature nodded once, a very human gesture that looked strange coming from something so obviously not human. But I can't just leave, I continued. People think there's a dangerous bear up here. They'll send hunters, lots of them. The creature's expression changed. The intelligence in its eyes sharpened, and I saw something I recognized from my time in combat. It was the look of a soldier who knew a fight was coming and was already planning for it. It spoke then, in a voice like gravel and wind. No hunters. 2 words in perfect English, but with an accent I couldn't place. Old, very old. I can try to keep them away, I said. But I need something from you. No more attacks on campers. Stay away from the trails. Let people think the dangerous animal moved on. The creature considered this for a long moment. Then it nodded again. Deal, it said. And just like that, they were gone. All 4 of them vanished into the forest like they'd never been there at all. I was alone on the mountainside with the smell of pine and the sound of my own hammering heart. I'd just negotiated a treaty with something that wasn't supposed to exist. I didn't sleep that night. Jat! How could I? Every sound in the darkness made me reach for my rifle. Every shadow looked like something crouched and waiting, but nothing came for me. They kept their word. Dawn found. Me sitting on the rocky ledge, watching the sun paint the mountains gold and red. The radio crackled again, Chief Morrison wanting an update. I told him the bear had moved on, probably headed deeper into the mountains where the streams were still running. He seemed satisfied with that. But as I packed my gear to head back down, I found something that changed everything. It was tucked under a rock near my sleeping bag, a piece of bark with marks carved into it. At first I thought they were random scratches. Then I realized they were numbers. 1968, 1969. The years I'd been in Vietnam. Someone or something had been in my pack while I slept. They'd gone through my wallet, found my military ID, and left me this message. They knew exactly who and what I was. The creature was waiting for me on the trail down, sitting on a fallen log like it had all the time in the world. Up close and in daylight, it looked even more impossible. Its fur was dark brown with streaks of silver, especially around the face. Old scars crisscrossed its arms and chest, the kind of scars you get from fighting. You were a warrior, it said in that strange, gravelly voice. Not a question. Ranger, Army, long time ago. It nodded. I smell the killing on you. Old blood, far away. That shook me. I'd never heard anyone describe combat that way, but it was accurate. There was a smell to death that got into your clothes, your skin, your soul. Most people couldn't detect it. But this thing could. What are you? I asked. It considered the question for a long time. When it finally answered, the words came slowly, like it was translating from a language that had no human equivalent. Guardian, protector of the deep places. Your people call us many names. Sasquatch, Bigfoot, wild man of the woods. We are older than your words. How many of you are there? Few now, very few. Your kind spreads like fire. We retreat, add to smaller spaces, darker places. But this mountain is ours, has always been ours. I thought about the cave, the bone arrangements, the territorial markers. You've been here a long time. My grandfather's grandfather walked these ridges, and his before him. We remember when your warriors in blue and gray bled the earth red. It paused. Some stayed. Deserters. Broken warriors who could not return to the world of men. We understood their pain. Is that why you didn't kill me? Because I'm a soldier? The creature's amber eyes met mine. Warriors recognize warriors. You hunt, but not for sport. You kill, but not for pleasure. Your scars match ours. It was right. I could see the parallel now. Two old soldiers, both scarred by battles they'd rather forget, both trying to protect something they cared about. For me, it was the hikers and campers who trusted me to keep them safe. For this being, it was an ancient way of life that was slowly disappearing. The attacks on campers, that was you marking territory? Young ones, eager to prove themselves. They see invaders and react as warriors do. I have counseled them to restraint. And the Thompson family? Frightened away, not harmed. But they brought loud noises, bright lights into the deep forest, disturbed sacred places. We responded, enthusiastically. I had to smile at that. Enthusiastically. That's one way to put it. Your people will come again, with guns, with dogs. When they do, some of my young warriors will not retreat. Blood will be spilled. Not if I can help it. I'll file reports saying the dangerous animal moved on. Keep the hunting parties away. But you have to help me. No more enthusiastic responses to campers. The creature stood, towering above me like a mountain come to life. This we can do, but there are conditions. Name them. The high places remain ours, past the stone markers, PP, as the bone circles. Your people may walk the low trails, follow the water, but the sacred caves, the old places where our ancestors rest, these are forbidden. Agreed. Anything else? You will not speak of us to others. Not truly. Let them think us legend, myth, imagination. This protects both our peoples. I thought about that. It made sense. If the world knew that creatures like this really existed, these mountains would be overrun with scientists, reporters, trophy hunters, and curiosity seekers. The delicate balance we'd just negotiated would be shattered in a week. Done, I said. But I need something too. If any of your people are injured, if you need medical supplies or help of any kind, find a way to contact me. I'll do what I can. The creature tilted its head, studying me. Why would you help us? Because I've spent 15 years in these mountains, and I've never seen anything like what you showed me yesterday. The way your people move through the forest, the way you understand the land. You belong here, maybe more than we do. For the first time, something that might have been a smile crossed the creature's features. You are a strange human, Ranger Jack. You're not exactly typical yourself. It laughed then, a sound like rocks falling down a mountainside. No, I suppose not. We shook hands, my small human hand engulfed by its massive clawed one. The grip was gentle but firm, the handshake of one professional to another. What should I call you? I asked. Ridge Walker, it said after a moment. I am the one who watches the boundaries. Well, Ridge Walker, I think we understand each other. Indeed. Until we meet again, warrior. And with that, it was gone. Not gradually, not step by step. It simply faded into the shadows between the trees, like it had never been there at all. I stood alone on the trail, wondering if I'd lost my mind. But the handshake had been real. The conversation had been real. And somewhere in the deep forest above me, an ancient intelligence was keeping watch over secrets that mankind wasn't ready to discover. I picked up my pack and headed down the mountain, already composing the report I would never file. That was 47 years ago. I'm 85 now, retired from the Forest Service for 2 decades, but I still live in the same small town at the base of Black Rock Ridge, and I still keep my promise to Ridge Walker. Over the years, there have been incidents, hikers who swear they saw something impossible in the deep woods. Campers who found their gear mysteriously moved during the night. Hunters who felt watched by invisible eyes and decided to try their luck on different mountains. Each time, I've done what I could. Filed reports about bear sightings in distant areas to draw attention away from the ridge. Talked to local newspapers about the importance of respecting wildlife habitat. Quietly suggested to over-eager investigators that their time might be better spent elsewhere. It hasn't always been easy. In 1983, a team of cryptozoologists from some university came through, asking questions about anomalous primate sightings in the area. I spent 3 weeks leading them to all the wrong places until they gave up and moved on. In 1995, a reality TV show wanted to film a Bigfoot hunt on the mountain. It took some creative bureaucracy, but I managed to get their permits tied up in red tape until they lost interest. The hardest part was in 2001, when my own nephew claimed he saw a 10-foot-tall ape man while hiking near the old Civil War sites. He was serious about organizing a search party until I convinced him that the combination of heat exhaustion and stress from his recent divorce had probably caused him to hallucinate. I hated lying to family. But some promises are more important than comfort. I've seen Ridgewalker 3 times since that first encounter. Once in 1989 when a forest fire threatened the high country, and I found him organizing his people to create fire breaks in strategic locations. Once in 2007 when I was tracking a lost child and found him gently guiding the little girl back toward the search area. And once last year when I hiked up to our original meeting place to leave some antibiotics I'd borrowed from the veterinary clinic. One of his people had been injured, probably by poachers' snares, and needed medical attention. Each time he greeted me like an old friend. We'd talk about changes in the forest, about the increasing number of visitors, about the challenges of protecting something precious in a world that values development over preservation. He's aged, as have I, but gracefully. The silver in his fur has spread, and he moves a little slower, but his amber eyes are still sharp with ancient intelligence. He's told me things over the years, about his people's history, their culture, their slow retreat from a world that no longer has room for mystery. There are fewer of them now than when we first met. Some have moved deeper into the wilderness, following game trails that lead to places no human has ever seen. Others have simply faded away, like old soldiers who decide they've fought long enough. But the young ones still patrol the boundaries, still watch over the sacred places, still honor the agreement we made all those years ago. The forest has changed too. Climate change has brought new weather patterns, new challenges. The drought that brought us together was nothing compared to what the mountains face now. Development pressure from the growing cities means more visitors, more traffic, more stress on the ecosystem that supports both human and non-human inhabitants. But somehow, the balance holds. The secret remains safe. I've never married, never had children of my own. Sometimes I wonder if that's because I've spent so much of my life protecting someone else's family. But I don't regret it. Some duties transcend personal happiness. My health is failing now. The doctors tell me I've got maybe 6 months, maybe a year if I'm lucky. But I'm not worried about dying. What worries me is what happens to the secret after I'm gone. That's why I'm writing this down. Not to break my promise, this account will remain sealed until long after anyone mentioned in it has passed on. But because someday, someone else may encounter what I encountered on Black Rock Ridge. Someone else may find themselves standing between two worlds, trying to protect something precious and ancient from a civilization that destroys what it doesn't understand. If you're that person, remember this: not all monsters are evil. Not all mysteries need to be solved. And sometimes the most important thing a human being can do is simply know when to walk away. The forest keeps its secrets for good reasons. Our job isn't to expose them, but to make sure they remain secrets worth keeping. Last month, I hiked up to the ridge one final time. My legs aren't what they used to be, and the climb nearly killed me, but I needed to see the old places once more, to pay my respects to the guardian who trusted me with the greatest secret of my life. Ridgewalker was waiting for me at our usual spot, as if he'd known I was coming. We sat together on the fallen log where we'd first talked as equals, 2 old soldiers watching the sun set over the mountains we'd both sworn to protect. "Your time grows short," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yeah, few months maybe." "You have kept faith. This will be remembered. Will your people be all right after I'm gone?" Ridgewalker was quiet for a long time, watching shadows lengthen across the valley below. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of countless years. "We endure. We adapt. We survive, as we always have. But the world grows smaller, and we grow fewer. Perhaps that is the way of things. I wish I could do more. You have done enough, more than enough. You gave us 47 years of peace. That is no small gift. We shook hands one last time. Yes, and I made my way back down the mountain. I didn't look back. Some goodbyes are too hard to watch. But as I reached my truck, I heard it one more time. That sound I'd first encountered as a young ranger following what I thought were bear tracks. The howl scream that had terrified me then, but now sounded like a salute, a warrior's farewell. I drove home knowing I'd kept my word. The secret was safe. The balance was maintained. And somewhere in the mountains above, ancient eyes continued their eternal watch over mysteries that mankind isn't ready to understand. That's enough. That has to be enough. Some stories are too important to tell while the storytellers are still alive. But when we're gone, when the last person who remembers is dust, maybe then someone will read this and understand. There are places in this world where magic still lives. There are beings who remember when the earth was young. And sometimes, if we're very careful and very respectful, they let us glimpse wonders beyond our imagination. Protect them. Preserve them. And above all, know when to keep your mouth shut and your promises sacred. The mountains are listening. My name is Catherine Bradshaw, but everyone calls me Kate. I've been a park ranger for 20 years now, and I'm the first woman in West Virginia to become a climbing rescue specialist. Some folks thought a woman couldn't handle the technical stuff, but I proved them wrong every time someone got stuck on these rocks. It was April 15th, 1991, when the call came in. Spring climbing season had just started, and the weather was doing that crazy dance. It always does this time of year. Warm during the day, cold enough to freeze your breath at night. Perfect conditions for accidents. We got a group of women climbers overdue on North Peak, dispatch told me over the radio. 5 of them, supposed to be back yesterday evening. I grabbed my gear and headed out. Seneca Rocks rises 900 feet straight up from the ground like 2 giant stone fingers pointing at the sky. The Seneca Indians used to say it was a sacred place. During World War II, the military trained soldiers to climb here, getting them ready for the mountains in Europe. Some of those boys never made it home. The locals have always told stories about the rocks. They say you can hear voices sometimes, echoing from inside the stone itself. Old-timers called them the Hollow Men, empty shells of people who got lost in the rocks and never found their way out. I always figured it was just talk meant to scare women away from climbing. Men didn't like the idea of us taking over their dangerous playground. But as I parked at the base of North Peak and looked up at those towering walls of sandstone, something felt wrong. The air was too still. No birds singing. Even the wind had stopped blowing through the pine trees. I shouldered my pack, 60 pounds of ropes, hardware, and medical supplies, and started the approach hike. The missing team was called the Iron Butterflies, led by a woman named Susan Drake, who'd served twice, and the Army before getting into climbing. Good climbers, all of them. Not the type to make stupid mistakes. The trail wound through thick forest before opening up at the base of the cliff. That's where I found their base camp, still set up, but abandoned. Sleeping bags scattered around, food left out. It looked like they'd left in a hurry. I studied the route they'd planned to climb, a technical multi-pitch line called Judgment Day. It goes straight up the main face for about 400 feet, with some tricky sections that require real skill. Their rack of climbing gear was missing from camp, which meant they'd taken it up with them. I started my ascent, following the bolts and fixed anchors that marked the route. The rock felt strange under my hands, warmer than it should be on a cool morning. By the second pitch, about 200 feet up, I found their first piece of abandoned gear. It was a Camelot, a spring-loaded device that wedges into cracks to protect climbers from falls. But this one was cut clean through, not worn or broken from stress, cut, like someone had taken a knife to the metal cable. My heart started beating faster. I clipped into the anchor and looked around, calling out their names. "Susan! Jennifer! Anyone up there?" The only answer was my own voice echoing back from the rock face. That's when I noticed something impossible. The echo wasn't coming from across the valley like it should. It was coming from inside the rock itself, from somewhere behind the solid sandstone wall I was pressed against. I put my ear to the stone and listened. Faint voices, like people talking far away. But there was nothing behind this rock except more rock. Solid stone that had been here for millions of years. I kept climbing, finding more cut gear every 100 feet or so. Ropes sliced through, hardware destroyed, like someone had systematically sabotaged everything the women had, placed for safety. At the top of the fourth pitch, I found something that made my blood run cold. Scratched into the rock face were words, "Help us, we're inside." The letters looked fresh, carved with a piece of climbing hardware. Below them were 5 names, the names of the missing climbers. I was 400 feet off the deck now, with storm clouds building to the west. The smart thing would have been to rappel down and call for backup. But those women were in trouble, and I was the only one who could help them. I pressed my hand against the rock where the message was carved. The stone felt hollow underneath, like there was empty space just inches below the surface. That was impossible. I'd studied the geology of Seneca rocks for years. It's solid Tuscarora sandstone, dense and compact. There shouldn't be any caves or hollow spaces. But as I kept my palm pressed to the rock, I could swear I felt something moving inside. A vibration, like someone walking around in there. Then I heard it clearly, a woman's voice, muffled but desperate. "Help us! We're trapped in here!" It was Susan Drake's voice. I was sure of it. I spent the next hour searching every crack and crevice, looking for some way into the rock face. The voices kept calling from inside, sometimes close, sometimes far away, like the women were moving around in there. But the stone stayed solid everywhere I touched it. Then, just as the first raindrops started to fall, I found it. A crack in the rock that looked normal from a distance, but when I got close, I could feel air moving through it. Cold air, with a smell like old basements and forgotten places. The crack was barely wide enough for my shoulders, but it seemed to go deeper than it should. I switched on my headlamp and squeezed inside. The passage opened up after about 10 feet, and I found myself in a space that shouldn't exist. I was standing in a cavern inside solid rock, with smooth walls that curved away beyond my light. The air was thick and still, and every sound echoed strangely. "Hello?" I called out. "Susan, can you hear me?" "We're here." The voice came from deeper in the cave. "Follow the passage to your left." I moved carefully, testing each step. The floor was smooth sandstone, but it felt wrong somehow. Too warm, too soft, like it was alive. My headlamp beam revealed a tunnel stretching ahead, perfectly carved through rock that should have been solid. 20 feet in, I found Jennifer Walsh. She was sitting against the cave wall, alive but wrong. Her skin was pale, almost gray, and her eyes were sunken deep in her skull. She looked up at me like she was having trouble focusing. "Jennifer? It's Kate Bradshaw, Park Service. I'm here to get you out." She smiled, but it was a tired, empty expression. "He found us yesterday, the Hollow Man. He said we could climb inside the rocks, see passages no one else had ever seen. It seemed amazing at first." "Who found you? Where are the others?" Jennifer pointed deeper into the cave. "They went further in. I tried to follow, but I got so tired. I can't seem to move much anymore." I knelt down next to her and checked her pulse. It was weak and slow, like her heart was barely pumping. Her skin was cold, despite the warm air in the cave. "We need to get you out of here," I said, helping her to her feet. But she was like dead weight, her muscles barely working. "I don't think I can make it," she whispered. "I feel so empty inside, like something's been taking pieces of me." That's when I saw him. A figure stepped out of the shadows at the far end of the tunnel. Tall, maybe 6 feet, wearing what looked like an old military uniform. But he was wrong in every way possible. His skin was the same gray-white color as limestone, and where his eyes should have been, there were just dark, empty holes. He moved without making any sound, like he was floating just above the ground. Another climber, he said, and his voice sounded like wind through empty spaces. You can join your friends. They're learning to become hollow, like us. I backed toward the entrance, half carrying Jennifer. What do you want? Life, he said simply. We gave ours to these rocks during the war, and now we need yours to keep existing. Your friends have been sharing theirs with us. Soon they'll be empty too, and they can stay here forever. More figures emerged from the shadows. All of them had that same hollow look, like they were just shells of people. Some wore military uniforms from the 1940s. Others had on climbing gear from different decades. All of them had those terrible empty eye sockets. I understood then. The WW2 training accidents, the climbers who'd disappeared over the years, they'd all ended up here, drained of whatever makes people alive, turned into these hollow things. The others, I said, still backing away. Where are they? The first figure pointed down a passage I hadn't noticed before. They're learning to let go. Soon they won't need their bodies anymore. I heard voices from that direction. Weak, tired voices calling for help. But between me and them stood at least 6 of these hollow men, and Jennifer was getting heavier in my arms with each step. I had to make a choice, try to reach the others and probably get all of us killed, or get Jennifer out and come back with help. The hollow men started moving toward us, not fast, but with purpose. Their feet didn't make any sound on the rock floor, and the air around them felt cold and dead. I made the call. Survival first, rescue second. Hold on, I whispered to Jennifer, and started dragging her toward the entrance crack. The hollow men followed, but they seemed to move slower near the opening, like they couldn't get too close to the outside world. I squeezed Jennifer through the crack first, then followed, my gear bag scraping against the stone walls. We made it out just as the storm hit for real. Rain pounded the rock face, and lightning lit up the valley below. I rappelled down with Jennifer, setting up a system to lower her safely even though she could barely. Help! By the time we reached the ground, she was unconscious. Her pulse was so weak I could barely find it. I got on the radio to call for a medical helicopter, but the storm was too bad for flying. We'd have to wait until morning. I made Jennifer as comfortable as I could in their abandoned tent, then sat in the rain and tried to figure out what I'd seen. Hollow spaces inside solid rock, empty-eyed figures that had once been human, a place where people could be drained of life itself. It sounded insane. But Jennifer was dying right in front of me, and 3 more women were still trapped in there with those things. I checked my gear and started planning. Whatever was happening in that rock, I was going back in, and this time, I was bringing everything I had. I waited until first light, when the storm had passed and Jennifer's breathing had steadied enough that I felt safe leaving her. The medical helicopter was still 2 hours out, but she was stable for now. Going back into the rock felt like walking toward my own grave. But Susan, Amy, and Lisa were still in there, and every hour I waited meant less chance of getting them out alive. This time, I brought everything. Extra headlamps, emergency food, water, first aid supplies, and every piece of climbing gear I had. If we were coming out, we'd need everything to work perfectly. The crack in the rock face looked different in the morning light, smaller somehow, like it was trying to close up. I had to really force myself through, and halfway in, the walls seemed to press against my shoulders like they were alive. The cave beyond was darker than I remembered, and my headlamp beam didn't reach as far. The air had that same dead basement smell, but stronger now, like something was rotting deep inside the rock. I moved past the spot where I'd found Jennifer, following the passage that led to where the hollow man had pointed, and the tunnel curved and twisted, and I started to realize something impossible. I'd been walking for 10 minutes, but the space inside the rock was bigger than the entire formation should be. The voices got clearer as I went deeper. I could hear Amy Chen calling for her sister, telling her she loved her. Lisa Morgan was crying, saying she was sorry for something. And Susan Drake, the tough ex-soldier, was whispering what sounded like prayers. The passage opened into a huge chamber, and I stopped dead at what I saw. The three women were sitting in the middle of the space, but they weren't alone. Hollow men surrounded them, 6 or 7 of the things, all reaching out with ghostly hands to touch the women's faces, their arms, anywhere skin was exposed. Where the hollow men touched them, the women's skin was turning the same gray-white color, and with each touch, the women seemed to deflate a little more, like something essential was being pulled out of them. "Susan!" I called out. She turned toward my voice, but her movements were slow and dreamlike. Half of her face had already gone gray, and one of her eyes was starting to look hollow and empty. "Kate," she whispered, "is that really you?" The hollow men noticed me then. They turned as one, their empty eye sockets somehow managing to stare right at me. The one in the old military uniform, their leader I guessed, smiled with lips that looked like dried leather. "You came back," he said. "Good. We have room for more." I pulled out my climbing rope and started setting up an anchor system on the chamber wall. "Let them go. You can have me instead." "Why choose?" The hollow man laughed, and the sound echoed off the walls like breaking glass. "We have all the time in the world, and you'll find it's not so bad being hollow. No pain, no fear, no worry about tomorrow." He was right about one thing. I was terrified. My hands were shaking as I clipped into my gear. But fear can be useful if you don't let it control you. I'd noticed something about these hollow men. They moved slow, like they were underwater, and they seemed to need physical contact to drain people. If I could keep moving, stay away from their hands, maybe I could get the women out. "Amy, Lisa, can you move?" Amy Chen tried to stand, but collapsed immediately. Lisa didn't even respond to her name. They were too far gone to help themselves. But Susan still had some fight left in her. The military training was keeping her conscious, even as the hollow men fed on her life. "Susan, I need you to listen to me," I called out, starting to rappel down from my anchor point. "When I say move, you grab Amy and Lisa and get toward my voice. Can you do that?" I think so." The hollow men started moving toward my rope, reaching up with those dead hands. I swung away from the wall, using my climbing skills to stay just out of reach. "Now, Susan, move!" Susan forced herself up, grabbed Amy under one arm and Lisa under the other, and started dragging them toward me. The hollow men turned to follow, but they were confused by having to choose between me and the women. That confusion saved us. I swung back to the wall and quickly set up a raising system, pulleys and mechanical advantage that would let me haul all 3 women up to my anchor point. It was risky with that much weight, but it was our only chance. "Clip into this," I said, dropping a harness down to Susan. "All 3 of you together." Susan managed to get herself and the others into the gear, but by then the hollow men had figured out what we were doing. They came at us fast, faster than I'd seen them move before, reaching with those draining hands. One of them grabbed my ankle just as I started to pull the women up. The cold hit me immediately. Not just temperature cold, but something deeper, like everything warm and alive inside me was being sucked out through that touch. I could feel my strength leaving, my thoughts getting fuzzy, but I'd spent 20 years building the muscle memory of climbing safety. Even as my mind started to go gray, my hands kept working the pulley system, hauling the women up inch by inch. The hollow man holding my ankle was pulling harder now, and I could see my own skin starting to turn that dead gray color. But I kept pulling on the rope, kept raising Susan and the others toward the tunnel entrance. "Let go of me," I whispered to the thing draining my life. "Take me, but let them get out first." The hollow man smiled. "Noble, but unnecessary. You'll all stay here with us. Forever." That's when Susan surprised everyone. Even half-drained, even with her skin turning gray and one eye going hollow, she still had soldier instincts. As I raised her up toward the tunnel, she pulled out a piece of climbing hardware, a heavy steel piton, and drove it straight into the hollow man's skull. The thing let go of my ankle and staggered backward, its empty eye sockets somehow managing to look shocked. Black liquid oozed from the hole Susan had made, and for a moment it looked almost hurt. "They can be damaged," Susan called down to me. "Hit them hard enough and they feel it." I didn't need to be told twice. I pulled out my ice axe and started swinging at any hollow man that got close, aiming for their heads and the places where their hearts should have been. They didn't like that at all. The whole chamber filled with their screaming, a sound like wind through empty houses, like the cry of something that had never been truly alive. But my strength was coming back now that they weren't touching me. The color was returning to my skin, and my thoughts were clearing up. I got Susan, Amy, and Lisa to the tunnel entrance, but they were in bad shape. Amy was unconscious, Lisa was barely breathing, and Susan was fighting to stay awake with half her life force drained away. We had to get out of the hollow spaces and back to the real world. But the hollow men weren't done with us yet. The tunnel back to the surface felt different now. Longer, twisting in directions that shouldn't have been possible. Inside the rock formation, my headlamp showed passages branching off in every direction, like the stone itself was growing new hollow spaces to trap us. I was carrying Amy, with Susan helping to support Lisa, and we were moving too slowly. Behind us, I could hear the hollow men following, their voices echoing through the tunnels like a cold wind. "The passage is changing," Susan said, her voice barely a whisper. "It's not the same way you came in." She was right. The tunnel we'd entered through was gone, replaced by 3 different passages that all looked wrong somehow. Too smooth, too warm, too much like the inside of something alive. "Which way?" I asked. But Susan was fading fast. The effort of fighting the hollow men had used up what little strength she had left. I chose the middle passage, hoping my sense of direction was still working. But after 5 minutes of walking, I realized we were going deeper into the rock, not up toward the surface. That's when I heard Jennifer's voice. "Kate, this way!" I turned around and saw her standing at the mouth of one of the other passages, but she looked different. Her skin had that same gray tint as the hollow men, and her eyes were starting to look empty. "Jennifer? How did you get back in here?" "I never left," she said, and smiled sadly. "I've been here all along. The thing you brought down from the rock face, that was just an empty shell. I'm still trapped in here with them." My heart sank. If Jennifer was still here, then what had I rescued? What was lying unconscious in the tent at base camp? "Don't listen to her," Susan whispered urgently. "It's one of them. They can look like us now." But Jennifer stepped closer, and I could see something in her face that looked real, looked human. "Kate, listen to me. There's only one way out of here, but it'll cost you everything you've worked for." "What do you mean?" "Your climbing gear," she said. "Every piece of it. The hollow men are bound to this rock by metal, the pitons and bolts that were driven into the stone over the years, all the hardware that's been left behind by climbers. They feed through the metal, use it to create these spaces inside the rock." I looked down at my gear. Thousands of dollars worth of specialized equipment that I'd collected over 20 years of climbing. Cams and nuts, pitons and carabiners, ice axes and pulleys. It was my career, my identity, my way of saving people. "If you leave all of it here," Jennifer continued, "if you break the metal connections they use, the hollow spaces will collapse. They'll be trapped forever, and you can get out through the original crack in the rock face. But without the gear, I can't get these women down the cliff safely. You'll have to free climb. No ropes, no protection, just you and the rock." It was insane. Free climbing with 3 badly injured people would be suicide. But staying here meant all of us would end up hollow and empty, feeding the things in the rock for the rest of eternity. The voices of the hollow men were getting closer. I could see their shapes moving in the darkness behind us, reaching out with those life-draining hands. I made the decision. "Help me," I told Susan. "We need to get every piece of metal off our bodies." Working together, we stripped off all our climbing hardware. Carabiners, cams, nuts, pitons. Everything metal went into a pile in the center of the passage. My ice axe, my rescue pulleys, even the metal buckles on our harnesses. "Now what?" Susan asked. Jennifer smiled, and for a moment she looked like her old self again. "Now you destroy it. Break the connections." I picked up my ice axe one last time and started smashing the pile of gear. Each impact sent shockwaves through the rock around us, and I could hear the hollow men screaming in pain or rage from somewhere in the darkness. The metal sparked and twisted as I destroyed 20 years of careful collecting. Every piece had a story. The first cam I'd ever bought, the pitons that had saved my life on a rescue in 1987, the carabiners my mentor had given me when I became a ranger. But with each piece I broke, the hollow spaces around us shuddered and started to collapse. The smooth walls cracked and crumbled, and cool, fresh air began to flow through the passages. "It's working," Susan said. "I can see daylight." The original crack in the rock face had opened up again, wider than before. Beyond it, I could see the cliff face and the valley below. But the hollow men weren't giving up. They rushed at us in a final, desperate attack, trying to drain enough life force to keep their spaces from collapsing completely. I grabbed Amy and Lisa, with Susan supporting herself between us, and we ran for the opening. My destroyed gear scattered behind us, and the screaming of the hollow men filled the air like breaking glass. We squeezed through the crack just as the hollow spaces collapsed completely. The rock face shuddered and groaned, and I heard a sound like a great door slamming shut forever. Then we were outside, clinging to the cliff face 400 feet above the ground with no gear, no ropes, and 3 injured women who could barely move. It was time to find out if 20 years of climbing experience could substitute for equipment. Free climbing down 400 feet of vertical rock with 3 injured people should have been impossible. But sometimes impossible is just another word for necessary. I went first, finding handholds and footholds that would work for people with limited strength. Susan followed, moving slowly but steadily. Amy and Lisa. I had to lower one at a time, using their clothes and my own body as anchors, taking tiny steps down the rock face. It took 4 hours. 4 hours of perfect concentration, of trusting the rock and trusting my experience. Every hold had to be solid. Every movement had to be controlled. When we finally reached the ground, all of us collapsed. Susan was barely conscious. Amy and Lisa were in shock, and I was shaking from exhaustion and adrenaline. The medical helicopter arrived 20 minutes later. They found Jennifer at base camp, still unconscious but alive. The doctors said she was suffering from severe dehydration and exposure, but she recovered completely. She never remembered being inside the rock, never remembered the hollow men or the impossible spaces. Amy and Lisa spent a week in the hospital. The doctors couldn't explain their condition: severe fatigue, muscle weakness, and what looked like mild hypothermia despite the warm weather. But they got better, slowly. Susan took longer to recover. She'd been drained more than the others, and something in her had been permanently changed. She could never quite shake the feeling that part of her was still back there in the rock, still feeding those empty things. She quit climbing and moved to Florida, as far from the mountains as she could get. I filed my official report, but I left out the supernatural parts: equipment failure, cave-in, successful rescue. The Park Service bought it, mostly because they wanted to. Nobody wants to believe in hollow men. But I knew the truth. And 3 months later, I quit my job. I couldn't climb anymore, not without gear, not without the equipment I'd destroyed to save those women. Every time I looked at the rock faces I used to love, I heard voices calling from inside the stone. I became a climbing instructor instead, teaching people the basics on small cliffs and indoor walls. Safe climbs, controlled environments, no risk of finding passages that shouldn't exist. I never told anyone the real story of what happened that day. But I did leave warnings, hidden in the climbing guides, and wrote descriptions for Seneca Rocks. Little notes about avoiding certain areas during storms, about hollow sounds in the rock face, about the importance of never climbing alone in the remote sections. Most people think they're just standard safety advice. Sometimes, late at night, I drive out to Seneca Rocks and listen. The wind through the stone sounds different now. Quieter, like something that used to echo there has been sealed away. The hollow men are gone, trapped forever by the collapse of their metal-fed spaces. But sometimes, when the moon is dark and the air is still, I think I can hear them calling. Faint voices from deep inside the rock, empty voices that hunger for life. The climbing guides now list several routes on Seneca Rocks, as permanently closed due to rockfall danger. Those are the areas where the hollow spaces used to be, where the stone still bears scars from what we found inside. New climbers ask me why I don't use gear anymore, why I only teach basic techniques. I tell them that sometimes the safest way up a cliff is to climb it with nothing but your hands and your knowledge. I don't tell them that some rocks are hungry. I don't tell them that some empty spaces are better left sealed. And I don't tell them that every piece of metal we drive into the stone, every piton and bolt and anchor we leave behind feeds something that should never have existed in the first place, because some truths are too dangerous to share. But if you ever find yourself climbing at Seneca Rocks and you hear voices calling from inside the stone, remember what I learned. There are worse things than falling. There are worse things than dying. There are hollow spaces in the world where people can be emptied of everything that makes them human, where life itself becomes food for things that never should have been. And sometimes the only way to escape is to leave everything behind and trust the rock to hold you up with nothing but your own two hands. My name is Joseph Whitehorse, but everyone calls me Joe. I've been a ranger in the Monongahela National Forest for 8 years now, and at 29, I'm the youngest head ranger this district has ever had. People say I got the job because I'm half Cherokee, half Scots-Irish, like the government needed someone who could talk to both worlds. Maybe they're right, but I earned my place here. The Forest Service sent me to protect the old Cherokee sites scattered through these West Virginia mountains. Sacred burial mounds, ceremonial grounds, places my great-grandmother used to tell stories about before she died, places that most people, including me, figured were just old legends. I grew up hearing those stories, but I also went to college, got a degree in forestry management. I believed in science, in facts you could measure and prove. Skinwalker legends belonged in the Southwest, not in Appalachian mountains. That's what I told myself anyway. September 1969 was when everything changed. The leaves were just starting to turn, painting the mountains in shades of red and gold. Nights were getting crisp, maybe 40 degrees, while the days stayed warm around 70. Perfect weather for hiking, perfect visibility, perfect conditions for the archaeological team that was coming to dig up our sacred sites. Dr. Richard Blackwood had gotten a federal permit to excavate 3 Cherokee burial mounds up in the high country. The government said I had to escort them, make sure they respected the cultural stuff, like having one mixed-blood ranger could somehow make grave robbing okay. I was checking the sites 2 days before the team arrived when I found the first signs of trouble. Someone had been up there already. The protective barriers around the largest mound were broken, and the earth looked disturbed. Not by machines or official digging. This was rough work, done by hand, in the dark. Strange patterns were scratched into the trees around the site. Not Cherokee symbols, but something else. Something that made my skin crawl just looking at it. The air smelled wrong, too. Like dead leaves and smoke mixed together, even though there was no fire anywhere nearby. I found footprints in the soft earth. Human prints going to the mound, but the ones leaving looked different. Longer. Wider. The toes seemed stretched out, like someone had been walking on their hands and feet instead of standing upright. That night, I called Thomas Sequoia, an elder from the Cherokee Nation who sometimes consulted with the Forest Service. He was 72 and still sharp as a knife. "Joe," he said after I described what I'd found, "you need to be very careful up there. Some medicine is meant to stay buried. When people dig up sacred things for the wrong reasons, they can wake up things that should stay sleeping." "Come on, Thomas," I said. "You don't really believe in that old stuff, do you?" There was a long pause. "Your great-grandmother believed. She taught you the protection songs when you were little, didn't she? Maybe you should remember them." I hung up thinking Thomas was getting old, letting superstition cloud his judgment. But that night, I dreamed about my great-grandmother's voice singing in Cherokee, words I hadn't heard in 20 years, but somehow still remembered. The archaeological team arrived on a Tuesday morning. Dr. Blackwood was a thin man in his 40s, with pale skin and intense eyes. He had 3 people with him, Lisa Chen, a graduate student who couldn't have been older than 24, Frank Morrison, their equipment manager, and Janet Wells, a photographer documenting the dig. "Ranger Whitehorse," Dr. Blackwood said, shaking my hand. "I understand you'll be monitoring our work to ensure cultural sensitivity. I want you to know we take these matters very seriously." He seemed sincere enough, but there was something in his eyes that reminded me of the scratches I'd found on the trees. Something hungry. We hiked up to the burial sites the next morning. The team set up their equipment while I explained the cultural significance of what they were about to disturb. Dr. Blackwood listened politely, but I could tell he was more interested in what might be buried than in what it meant to my people. "These mounds date back at least 300 years, I told them. They were built by Cherokee families to honor their ancestors. In our tradition, disturbing them brings bad luck," Dr. Blackwood finished with a smile. "Don't worry, Ranger. We're not treasure hunters. This is scientific research that will help preserve Cherokee history for future generations." Lisa, the grad student, was different. She listened carefully and asked respectful questions. "What were those symbols carved into the trees?" she asked, pointing to the strange marks I'd found. "I don't know," I admitted. "They're not Cherokee. Someone else has been up here recently." Frank Morrison was setting up a grid system to map the dig site when his equipment started acting strange. The electronic measuring devices kept showing different readings every time he used them. His camera wouldn't focus properly. Even his compass spun wildly instead of pointing north. "Must be mineral deposits in the ground," Dr. Blackwood said, but he looked worried. Janet was taking photos of the site when she called out, "Hey, look at this!" She'd found more of those strange scratches, these ones carved deep into the bark of an old oak tree. They formed a pattern that hurt to look at, lines that seemed to twist and move when you weren't looking directly at them. "That's new," I said. "Those marks weren't here yesterday." Dr. Blackwood examined the scratches closely. "Probably some local kids playing pranks," he said, but his voice was shaky. "We should get started before we lose the daylight." They began excavating the smallest mound first. As soon as Frank's shovel bit into the earth, the temperature dropped 20 degrees. Our breath came out in white clouds, even though it was a warm September afternoon. "Weather changes fast in the mountains," I said, but I was lying. I'd never felt anything like this before. The deeper they dug, the colder it got. Lisa was shivering so hard she could barely hold her notebook. Frank kept stopping to warm his hands, and Janet's camera was fogging up from the sudden temperature change. That's when we found the first bones. They weren't human bones. They were animal remains, but twisted and wrong somehow. Ribs that curved the wrong way. Skull fragments that were too big and had too many teeth. Dr. Blackwood examined them with growing excitement. "This is extraordinary," he whispered. "These bone structures don't match any known North American species. They're like evolutionary mistakes, or what?" Lisa asked. "Or something that was never supposed to exist in the first place." As the afternoon wore on, the team found more of these twisted animal bones mixed in with traditional Cherokee burial items. Pottery, jewelry, tools, all exactly what you'd expect to find. But the animal remains made no sense. Frank found something that made him drop his shovel and step back. It was a necklace made of what looked like human teeth, but the teeth were too long and too sharp. They'd been strung together with sinew and hung with small bones that clicked together like wind chimes. "That's not Cherokee work," I said. And I meant it. My people honored life, even in death. We didn't make jewelry from teeth and bones like some kind of trophy collection. Dr. Blackwood picked up the necklace and held it up to the light. The moment his fingers touched it, his whole body went rigid. His eyes rolled back in his head, showing only white. Lisa screamed. For maybe 10 seconds, Dr. Blackwood stood there like a statue, the necklace clutched in his hands. Then he blinked, looked around confused, and smiled. "Sorry," he said, as if nothing had happened. "Just felt dizzy for a moment. The altitude, probably." But his smile was different now, wider. His teeth looked sharper. Janet tried to take a photo of the necklace, but her camera wouldn't work. Every picture came out blurred or completely black. even in full daylight. "We should stop for today," I said. Something was very wrong and getting worse by the minute. "Nonsense," Dr. Blackwood said, still wearing that strange new smile. "We're just getting to the interesting parts." As the sun started setting, I noticed that Frank and Lisa were acting different too. Frank kept sniffing the air like he was smelling something the rest of us couldn't. Lisa had stopped taking notes and was just staring at the bones they'd uncovered, her eyes wide and unblinking. Only Janet seemed normal, and she looked scared. "Dr. Blackwood," she said, "maybe we should listen to the ranger. This place feels wrong." Dr. Blackwood turned to look at her, and for just a second, his face looked like something else. Something with too many teeth and eyes that reflected light like an animal's. Then it was just him again, smiling that sharp new smile. "Wrong?" he said. "No, Janet. This place feels right. More right than anywhere I've ever been." That's when I knew we were in serious trouble. I called Thomas Sequoia that night from my cabin, but the phone lines were down. The radio wouldn't work either. Just static and weird noises that sounded almost like voices speaking in a language I didn't recognize. The archaeological team was camping at the site despite my suggestions that they stay in town. When I hiked back up there the next morning, I found them gathered around the excavation like it was a campfire. They weren't talking, just staring down into the hole they'd dug. "Good morning," I called out, but none of them looked up. Dr. Blackwood was kneeling next to the pit, running his hands through the dirt like he was looking for something specific. His fingernails had grown overnight, thick and yellowed, more like claws than nails. Frank was crouched beside him, and I could see that the hair on his arms and neck had gotten thicker and darker. When he finally looked at me, his eyes had changed color from brown to pale yellow. Lisa was the worst. She was sitting cross-legged by the edge of the pit, rocking back and forth and humming something that definitely wasn't Cherokee. Her teeth had grown longer, and when she smiled at me, I could see that her canines were now sharp points. Only Janet looked normal, but she was pressed against a tree about 20 feet away from the others, clutching her camera like it was a weapon. "Ranger," she whispered when I got close to her. "Something happened to them last night. They've been like this since before dawn. They won't eat regular food anymore, only raw meat. Frank caught a rabbit with his bare hands and they shared it." I looked back at the team. Dr. Blackwood had found something in the dirt and was holding it up to examine it. It was another one of those bone necklaces, but this one was bigger and more elaborate. The teeth weren't human. They came from something with a muzzle full of fangs. "Dr. Blackwood," I said loudly, "I think we need to shut down this excavation." He looked up at me, and his face wasn't human anymore, not completely. His jaw had stretched out, making his mouth wider. His eyes were completely yellow now, with pupils that looked like a wolf's. "Shut down," he said, and his voice was rougher, like he was talking around teeth that didn't fit in his mouth anymore. "We're just getting started, Ranger. We've found things here that will change everything we know about this continent's history." "Those aren't historical artifacts," I said, pointing at the bone necklaces. "Someone's been using these sites for dark rituals. We need to get out of here and call for help." Frank laughed, but it came out as more of a howl. "Help? From who? The people who forced your ancestors off this land? The government that gives permits to dig up sacred graves?" He was right about that, but this wasn't the time for politics. This was about survival. Lisa stopped humming and looked at me with those changed eyes. "The old ones are waking up, Joe," she said, using my first name like we were friends. "They've been sleeping in these mountains for so long, waiting for someone to call them back. We're going to help them." I grabbed Janet's arm. "We're leaving. Now." But Dr. Blackwood stood up, and I realized he was taller than he'd been yesterday. His body had stretched out, become more angular. His clothes were tight in some places and loose in others, like his skeleton had rearranged itself overnight. "No one leaves," he said. "Not until we finish what we started." That's when Janet and I ran. We made it maybe half a mile down the mountain before we heard them coming after us. But they weren't running on two legs anymore. I could hear 4 sets of paws hitting the ground, closing the distance fast. "The old ranger station," I gasped to Janet. There's an emergency radio there. We ran harder than I'd ever run in my life, crashing through underbrush and leaping over fallen logs. Behind us, something howled, a sound that was part human scream and part wolf call. The station was an old stone building left over from the 1940s. I still had a key, and we got inside just as three shapes burst out of the tree line behind us. In the fading daylight, I could see what the archaeological team had become. They were still partly human, but they moved on all fours now. Their spines had curved, their arms and legs had lengthened, and their faces had pushed forward into something like muzzles. They were covered in thick, dark fur, but they still wore the torn remains of their clothes. Dr. Blackwood was the largest. He stood up on his hind legs and looked at the station door, his yellow eyes gleaming wit with intelligence that was definitely still human. "Come out, Joe," he called, and his voice was a mix of his old professor tone and a wolf's growl. "We want to show you something wonderful, something your ancestors understood before the white man's Christianity poisoned their minds." The emergency radio was dead. So was the backup radio. Even my truck wouldn't start. The engine turned over but immediately died, like something was interfering with the electrical system. We were trapped. Janet was hyperventilating in the corner. "What are they?" she whispered. I thought about my great-grandmother's stories, about Thomas Sequoia's warnings, about the bone necklaces and the strange symbols carved into the trees. "Skinwalkers," I said. "But not the kind from Navajo legends. Someone's been using Cherokee sacred sites to create something else, something wrong." Through the windows, we could see them circling the building. They were testing the walls, looking for weak spots. Frank had found a loose board and was working at it with claws that had replaced his fingernails. "The old Cherokee stories," I told Janet, trying to remember everything my great-grandmother had taught me. "They say there are people who trade their humanity for power, who use sacred medicine for evil purposes. They become something that's neither human nor animal, but something in between." "How do we stop them?" Janet asked. I wished I knew. We barricaded ourselves in the station for 3 hours while they circled outside. Sometimes they would scratch at the walls or call to us in voices that were still partly human. Dr. Blackwood kept trying to convince us to come out, promising to show us the truth about your heritage, Joe. Around midnight, they went quiet. Janet and I sat in the darkness, afraid to use the flashlight in case it attracted their attention. "Maybe they left," Janet whispered. "That's Wilco." And we heard the truck. Someone was driving up the mountain road, engine growling as it climbed the steep grade. Headlights swept across the windows of the station, and I heard a truck door slam. "Hello?" a voice called out. "Anyone up here? I'm looking for the archaeological dig site." I recognized the voice. It was Raymond Pike, a local collector who bought and sold Indian artifacts. Most of what he dealt in was legal tourist stuff, but Thomas Sequoia had always suspected Pike was involved in black market sales of sacred items. "Over here," Dr. Blackwood's voice answered from the darkness. But it sounded human again, normal and concerned. "Thank goodness you're here. We've had an accident. Some of our team are injured." I heard footsteps crunching across the clearing. Janet grabbed my arm. "That's him," I whispered. "Pike's the one who's been stealing artifacts and conducting those rituals. He's turning people into skinwalkers." Through a crack in the boarded window, I could see Pike walking toward where Dr. Blackwood was standing. In the moonlight, Blackwood looked completely human again. No stretched limbs, no wolf features, just a normal, middle-aged professor in torn clothes. "Mr. Pike," Blackwood said warmly, "I'm so glad you could make it. Have you brought the additional items we discussed?" Pike was carrying a leather bag that clinked when he walked. "Everything you asked for," he said. "Bone whistles, shell gorgets, and 3 more of the transformation necklaces. With these, you'll be able to change a dozen more people by the full moon." "Excellent," Dr. Blackwood said. But as he spoke, his form began to shift again. His shadow on the ground was growing longer and more distorted. Pike didn't seem to notice. He was too excited about the money he was going to make. "I've got buyers lined up in 3 states for whatever artifacts you dig up. And once we have more of these creatures, we can expand the operation. Indeed, Blackwood growled, and his voice was getting rougher again. Though I'm afraid our partnership is about to change. That is when Pike realized something was wrong. He looked up at Blackwood and saw what I was seeing through the window. A man-thing with yellow eyes and too many teeth, standing on legs that bent the wrong way. Pike tried to run, but Frank and Lisa came out of the darkness on either side of him. They were fully transformed now, moving on all fours with fluid grace that was beautiful and terrifying. Pike screamed and dropped his bag. Sacred items scattered across the ground. Necklaces, carved bones, stone tools that gleamed with their own inner light. You see, Dr. Blackwood said, his words slurring as his mouth changed shape, we don't need partners anymore. We need food. What happened next was too horrible to describe in detail. Pike had created monsters, and now those monsters were finishing what he started. His screams echoed off the mountains for maybe 2 minutes, then cut off abruptly. But Pike's death broke something. The sacred items he'd been carrying weren't corrupted like the bone necklaces. They were real Cherokee artifacts, blessed by medicine men and charged with protective power. When they hit the ground and scattered, they began to glow with soft white light. The skinwalkers backed away from that light like it was burning them. They howled and snarled, but they couldn't get close to Pike's scattered collection. I knew what I had to do. Stay here, I told Janet, and before she could argue, I opened the door and ran toward the scattered artifacts. The skinwalkers saw me coming and tried to intercept, but the protective light kept them at bay. I grabbed as many of the sacred items as I could carry, a eagle bone whistle, a shell gorget with traditional symbols, and a medicine bag that hummed with power when I touched it. Dr. Blackwood circled me, snapping his elongated jaws. You can't stop this, Joe. This is your heritage. This is what your people were being. For Christianity and civilization weakened them. No, I said, clutching the sacred items. This is what happens when sacred power gets corrupted by greed and evil. My people understood the difference. I put the eagle bone whistle to my lips and blew. The sound that came out wasn't like anything I'd ever heard, high and pure and strong enough to shake the mountains. The skinwalkers howled and covered their ears, their transformed bodies writhing in pain. Then I began to sing. I don't know where the words came from. They were in Cherokee, a language I barely spoke, but my great-grandmother's voice was singing along with mine. The cleansing songs she'd taught me when I was 5 years old, songs I thought I'd forgotten. As I sang, the corrupted bone necklaces began to crumble. The strange symbols carved into the trees faded away. The sacred burial mounds, which had been glowing with sick green light, began to shine with clean white radiance instead. The skinwalkers were changing back, but it wasn't easy. Their bodies convulsed and twisted as the corrupt medicine left them. Frank collapsed first, his wolf features melting away to reveal the middle-aged man he'd been. Lisa followed, gasping and crying as her teeth shrank back to normal size. Dr. Blackwood fought the transformation the longest. He'd been the most changed, and he'd embraced the corruption more completely than the others. But finally, even he fell to his knees as the protective songs stripped away the dark power that had transformed him. When it was over, 3 exhausted human beings lay unconscious in the clearing. The sacred burial sites were glowing with clean light that gradually faded to normal darkness. And Raymond Pike was dead, killed by the monsters he'd created. I helped Janet gather up the scattered artifacts while we waited for the others to wake up. Most of Pike's collection would have to go back to the Cherokee Nation, where it belonged. What happens now? Janet asked. I looked up at the burial mounds, which finally felt peaceful again. Now I do my job properly, I said. Protect these sites like I should have been doing all along. Dr. Blackwood and his team didn't remember much about their transformation. The official report said they'd suffered from food poisoning that caused hallucinations and disorientation. Janet's photographs had all come out blank or blurred, so there was no evidence of what had really happened. Pike's death was ruled an animal attack. The coroner found wolf tracks around his body, which was technically true, even if those wolves used to be archaeologists. The excavation permits were permanently revoked. I convinced the Forest Service to classify the Cherokee sites as restricted areas, off-limits to researchers and tourists alike. New federal laws were passed to protect native burial grounds from unauthorized excavation. Lisa Chen left graduate school and moved to California. She sent me a letter 6 months later saying she'd started having dreams in languages she didn't recognize, and that she felt drawn to visit Cherokee communities in North Carolina. I wrote back encouraging her to follow that instinct. Frank Morrison took a job with the national parks in Alaska, as far from burial mounds as he could get. He called me once to ask if I thought the change had been permanent. I told him that some experiences mark you forever, but that wasn't necessarily a bad thing. Dr. Blackwood resigned from the university and disappeared. I heard rumors that he'd joined a monastery in Tibet, seeking some kind of spiritual redemption. I hoped that was true. Janet Wells published a book about the ethics of archaeological research, though she never mentioned what had really happened in West Virginia. We stayed in touch, and she sometimes visited the forest to take photographs of wildlife and landscapes instead of burial sites. As for me, I embraced my role as cultural liaison and site guardian. I started working more closely with the Cherokee Nation, learning about traditional medicines and protective ceremonies. Thomas Sequoia became my teacher, sharing knowledge that my great-grandmother would have been proud to see passed down. I never married, never had children. The mountains and the sacred sites became my family. I learned to speak Cherokee fluently, to perform the old ceremonies properly, and to recognize the signs when dark medicine was being worked in the forest. Because it wasn't over, evil like Pikes doesn't just disappear. Every few years I'd find evidence of someone trying to steal artifacts or conduct unauthorized rituals on sacred ground. Sometimes they were treasure hunters who didn't know what they were messing with. Sometimes they were people who knew exactly what they were doing. I stopped them all. The Forest Service eventually made me a director of cultural preservation for the entire region. I trained other rangers in recognizing the signs of spiritual disturbance, though I never told them the complete truth about what those signs meant. Some knowledge is too dangerous to share widely. On clear nights when the moon is full and the autumn air is crisp, I still patrol the burial sites. I carry the eagle bone whistle Pike had stolen, along with other sacred items that the Cherokee Nation entrusted to my care. The sites stay quiet now, protected by both federal law and traditional medicine. But sometimes, when the wind is just right, I can hear voices in the darkness. Not threatening voices, but grateful ones. The spirits of my ancestors, finally able to rest in peace. And sometimes I hear my great-grandmother's voice among them, singing the old songs that kept the darkness at bay. The skinwalkers are gone, but the sacred places remain. And as long as I draw breath, I'll make sure they stay protected, no matter what comes out of the shadows looking for power it was never meant to have. Some bridges between worlds should never be crossed, but someone has to guard the crossing, just in case. That someone is me. My name is Marcus Holbrook, but everyone calls me Mark. I've been a park ranger for 16 years now, and I've seen plenty of things in the wilderness that would make most folks nervous. Bears, mountain lions, lost hikers who barely made it out alive. But nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for what happened at Dolly Sods in July of 1975. I was leading a Boy Scout troop on what should have been a routine week-long camping trip. 12 boys, ages 11 to 16, all eager to test their wilderness skills in one of West Virginia's most beautiful places. Dolly Sods sits high up on a plateau, all open meadows and rocky outcrops, with views that stretch for miles. It's isolated, 30 miles of wilderness with no roads, no facilities, nothing but nature. The boys were a good mix. Tim Anderson, our Eagle Scout candidate at 16, knew his stuff and helped keep the younger kids in line. Dave Thompson and Sean O'Connor were experienced campers, always ready for adventure. Then we had the nervous ones like Bobby Martinez, just 12 and on his first real wilderness trip. His mom had packed enough supplies for a month. "Mr. Holbrook, are there really bears out here?" Bobby asked as we set up our first camp near Bear Rocks. The evening sun was painting the meadow golden, and a cool breeze carried the smell of pine and wild grass. "Sure are," I said, checking his tent stakes. "But they're more afraid of you than you are of them. That's why we hang our food up high and keep a clean camp." The area had history. During World War II, the military used these mountains for artillery training. Sometimes hikers still found old shell casings or bits of metal. I always warned the boys to never touch anything suspicious. That first night, we sat around our campfire sharing stories. The older boys told ghost tales that made the younger ones scoot closer to the flames. I was about to suggest we turn in when we heard it. A howl from somewhere out in the darkness. It wasn't like any coyote or wolf I'd ever heard. It started low, almost human-sounding, then rose to a wild cry that seemed to echo from the rocks themselves. The boys went quiet. "What was that?" Jimmy Holcomb whispered. "Just a coyote," I said, but something about the sound bothered me. It had too much intelligence in it. They've been moving back into these mountains, nothing to worry about. But as we banked the fire and headed to our tents, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been watching us from the tree line. The hair on my neck stood up, the way it does when you know you're being hunted. The boys settled into their tents, whispering and giggling the way kids do when they're excited and a little scared. I lay in my sleeping bag, listening to the night sounds. Owls hooted, leaves rustled in the wind. Normal wilderness sounds. Then I heard it again, that howl, but closer this time, and from a different direction, then another one, off to the east. They were calling to each other. I unzipped my tent flap and peered out. The moon was bright enough to see across the meadow, but the shadows under the trees looked darker than they should. I watched for movement, straining my eyes, but saw nothing. Just coyotes, I told myself, maybe a small pack. I dealt with problem animals before, but deep down I knew this was different. In all my years in the wilderness, I'd never heard anything that sounded quite like that. There was something wrong with those howls, something that made every instinct I'd developed scream danger. I checked my watch. 11:30 p.m. The boys had finally gone quiet. I decided to stay awake a while longer, just to be safe. As a scout leader and park ranger, these kids were my responsibility. Their parents trusted me to bring them home safe. The howls continued throughout the night, always moving, always from different spots around our camp, like they were circling us. But every time I looked out, I saw nothing but empty meadow and dark trees. Morning couldn't come fast enough. Dawn broke clear and cool, with mist rising from the valleys below. I was up early, starting breakfast and trying to shake off the unease from the night before. The boys emerged from their tents one by one, stretching and yawning. "Did you guys hear those coyotes last night?" Dave Thompson asked, rolling up his sleeping bag. "They sounded weird," said Alex Rivera, our quiet artist, who noticed everything. "Like they were trying to talk or something." "All animals communicate," I said, stirring oatmeal over the camp stove. "Coyotes are especially smart. They coordinate their hunts with calls." But as the boys ate breakfast, I walked the perimeter of our camp. What I found made my blood run cold. Tracks, big ones. They looked like wolf prints, but larger than any wolf I'd ever seen. 5 inches across, with claw marks deep in the soft earth. But here's what really bothered me. Some of the prints showed what looked like thumb marks, like whatever made them had opposable thumbs. I knelt down, studying the clearest print. No question about it. This thing had hands as well as paws. The print was fresh, maybe from just before dawn. "Find something interesting, Mr. Holbrook?" Tim Anderson appeared beside me. As our oldest scout, he'd been helping me keep watch on the younger boys. "Just checking for animal sign," I said, standing up. "Good practice for your tracking merit badge." Tim studied the prints, and I saw his face change. He was smart enough to see what I was seeing. "Those aren't from any normal animal," he whispered. "Let's keep this between us for now," I said. "No need to scare the younger kids." We broke camp and started hiking deeper into the wilderness. I'd planned a route that would take us through some of the most beautiful parts of Dolly Sods. Rocky outcrops with amazing views, hidden waterfalls, meadows full of wildflowers. Ed, educational and fun. But as we hiked, I kept finding more tracks. Always the same. Too big, too intelligent looking, with those disturbing thumb marks. Whatever was making them was following us. Around noon, we stopped for lunch near a small creek. The boys were having a great time splashing in the water and exploring the rocks. I was checking our map when Bobby Martinez came running up to me, his face pale. "Mr. Holbrook, there's something in the trees watching us." I looked where he was pointing, across the creek to a thick stand of pines. The shadows were deep, but I couldn't see anything. "What did it look like?" I asked. "Big, really big, like a person, but wrong. It had yellow eyes." Some of the other boys had gathered around, curious. "Bobby's seeing things," Randy Pierce said with a laugh. Randy was 14, old enough to act tough, but young enough to still be scared. "Probably just a tree stump." "I know what I saw," Bobby said, but his voice shook. I studied the tree line carefully. No movement, no sounds except the normal forest noises. But something felt wrong. The birds had gone quiet. "Let's pack up and move on," I said. "We want to reach our next campsite before evening." As we gathered our gear, I heard a stick break in the forest across the creek. Then another. Something large was moving through the trees, keeping pace with us but staying hidden. We hiked for another 3 hours, and I kept hearing sounds from the forest. Branches breaking, leaves rustling when there was no wind, and sometimes, just at the edge of hearing, a low growling sound. The boys were starting to notice too. They stayed closer together, talked less, kept looking over their shoulders. Even the older ones were getting nervous. We set up our second camp in a small clearing surrounded by tall pines. I picked the spot carefully, good sight lines, open ground, only one way in or out. If something wanted to approach us, I'd see it coming. As the sun went down, we built our fire bigger than usual. The boys helped gather extra wood without me asking. They could feel it. Too, we were being watched. "Mr. Holbrook," Kevin Liu, one of our youngest scouts, tugged on my sleeve. "Are we safe out here?" I looked down at his worried face, then at all the boys gathered around the fire. They trusted me to protect them. Their parents had trusted me to bring them home. "We're safe," I said. "That's what we're here for, to learn how to take care of ourselves in the wilderness. And we're doing this together, as a team." But even as I spoke those reassuring words, I caught movement in the trees behind Kevin. Something large and dark, there for just a second before it melted back into the shadows. We were definitely being hunted, and whatever was out there was smart enough to stay just out of sight, patient enough to follow us all day, and big enough to leave those massive tracks. As the fire crackled and the boys told stories, I made my decision. Tomorrow we were changing course, heading back toward the main trails where there were other hikers and rangers. We'd cut the trip short, but as those familiar howls started up again in the darkness around us, closer now, more of them, calling back and forth like they were planning something, I wondered if we'd waited too long. The hunt was just beginning. The third morning started wrong. I woke up before dawn to check on the boys, and Bobby Martinez wasn't in his tent. "Bobby!" I called out, trying to keep my voice calm. The other boys were stirring now, unzipping their sleeping bags. "He's probably just using the bathroom," Tim said, but I could hear the worry in his voice. We searched the entire campsite. No Bobby, no sign of a struggle. His sleeping bag was neat, like he'd gotten up quietly and just walked away. But Bobby was scared of the dark. He'd never leave camp alone. Then Sean O'Connor, who'd been checking the edge of camp, called out, "Mr. Holbrook, you need to see this." More tracks, lots of them. Hay circled our entire campsite, and they were fresh. Whatever had made them had been watching us all night, walking around and around our tents while we slept. But the worst part was what we found 20 yards into the forest. Bobby's sneaker sitting upright on a fallen log like someone had placed it there carefully. There were dark stains on the ground nearby. "Where's Bobby?" Jimmy Holcomb asked, his voice small and scared. I stared at that sneaker, my mind racing. No animal would remove a shoe so neatly. This was deliberate. Planned. "We're breaking camp right now," I said. "Everyone pack up. We're heading back." "But what about Bobby?" Dave Thompson asked. I looked at 11 scared faces, boys who'd trusted me to keep them safe. How do you tell kids that their friend is probably dead? How do you explain that something inhuman had taken him? We'll send help back for Bobby, I said. Right now I need to get you boys to safety. We packed quickly, everyone working with desperate efficiency. But as we prepared to leave, I heard something that made my blood freeze. From deep in the forest came a sound like laughter, if laughter could be made by something that wasn't quite human. The boys heard it too. Alex started crying quietly. Kevin grabbed onto Tim's arm and wouldn't let go. "What is that?" Randy whispered. I didn't answer because I didn't know. But whatever had Bobby was enjoying this. It was playing with us. We started hiking fast, following the trail back toward civilization. But within an hour, I knew we were in serious trouble. The sounds were following us, breaking branches, rustling leaves, and occasionally that horrible, not quite human laughter. And the tracks were everywhere now. Dozens of them, all around us, like a pack was herding us along the trail. "Mr. Holbrook?" Tim jogged up beside me. "Are those wolves?" I looked where he was pointing. Through the trees, I could see shapes moving parallel to our trail. They were big, bigger than any wolf should be. And they walked wrong, sometimes on 4 legs, sometimes upright like people. "The boy's moving," I told Tim. "Stay together. Don't let anyone fall behind." But it was too late for that. As we rounded a bend in the trail, Pete Walsh, my 19-year-old assistant leader, suddenly stopped. "Where's Randy?" he asked. We counted heads. 10 boys. Randy Pierce was gone. "He was right behind me," Sean said. "He was right there." We backtracked 50 yards, calling Randy's name. Nothing. It was like he'd just vanished from the middle of our group. Then we heard screaming from somewhere off the trail. Randy's voice, high and terrified, calling for help. But the sound was moving away from us, deeper into the wilderness. "We have to help him!" Dave started toward the sound, but I grabbed his arm. "No, we stay together." The words felt like poison in my mouth, but I couldn't risk losing more boys. "Everyone hold hands. No one lets go." The screaming continued for maybe 2 minutes, then cut off suddenly. The silence that followed was worse than the sound had been. Jimmy was sobbing now. Alex looked like he might faint. Even the older boys were shaking. "What's happening?" Kevin whispered. "What's taking them?" Before I could answer, something stepped out onto the trail ahead of us. It was 6 feet tall and covered in dark fur, but it stood upright like a man. Its face was like a wolf's, but the eyes were human, yellow and intelligent and full of hunger. When it smiled, I saw teeth like knives. The worst part was its hands. They were human hands, but covered in fur and ending in claws. One of them held Randy's torn Boy Scout handbook. The creature looked at us for a long moment, tilting its head like it was studying us. Then it dropped the handbook and melted back into the forest without making a sound. "Did you see that?" Dave breathed. I had seen it. We all had. There was no denying it now. We weren't dealing with normal animals. These things were smart, or organized, and they were hunting us for sport. "Listen to me," I told the boys, trying to keep my voice steady. "We're going to get through this, but I need you to do exactly what I say. No questions, no arguments. Can you do that?" They nodded, their faces white with fear. "Good. We're going to find a place we can defend, somewhere with our backs to rocks or water, where they can only come at us from one direction." As we hiked, I tried to think like the military instructor I'd once been. These creatures were intelligent predators, but they weren't invincible. They'd taken Bobby and Randy when the boys were alone or separated from the group. They seemed to prefer picking off the weak or isolated, which meant they were testing us, seeing how we'd react, learning our weaknesses. The question was, what would they do when they got tired of playing? I had a feeling we were about to find out. We found our defensive position just as the sun was setting, a natural bowl in the rocks with steep walls on 3 sides and only one narrow entrance. I set the boys to work gathering firewood and rocks while I tried to figure out how to keep 9 kids alive against a pack of supernatural predators. "Mr. Holbrook," Tim approached me as I checked my equipment. "Those things, they're not natural, are they?" I looked at him, 16 years old, Eagle Scout material, trying so hard to be brave for the younger boys. He deserved the truth. "No, I said quietly. They're not. Then what are they? Before I could answer, we heard them coming. Howls echoed from all around us, but these weren't the distant calls from the past 2 nights. These were close, and they were different, more like war cries than animal sounds. Everyone into the center, I shouted. Form a circle, backs together. The boys moved fast, grabbing the rocks we'd gathered and clustering around our small fire. I could see shape, as moving in the darkness beyond the entrance to our rocky shelter, tall shadows that walked sometimes on 2 legs, sometimes 4. Then they stepped into our firelight, and I got my first good look at what we were facing. 7 of them, all about 6 feet tall, covered in dark fur but standing upright like men. Their faces were wolf-like but too intelligent, too human in the eyes. And their hands, always those horrible human hands with claws instead of fingernails. But the worst part was their leader. He was bigger than the others, with gray fur and scars across his muzzle. Around his neck hung dog tags, military identification from the Civil War era. As I stared at those tags, pieces clicked together in my mind. The military history of this area. Stories I'd heard from old-timers about soldiers who'd deserted during the war and hidden in these mountains. Local legends about men who'd turned to cannibalism to survive and been cursed for it. You know what we are, the leader spoke, and his voice was like gravel mixed with growling. We can smell the understanding on you, soldier. I stepped forward, putting myself between the creatures and the boys. What do you want? What we've always wanted. Fresh meat. Young meat. He smiled, showing those knife-like teeth. Your cubs will feed us well. Over my dead body. That can be arranged. The leader gestured to his pack. We could take them all right now. But where's the sport in that? We prefer the hunt. The fear. It makes the meat taste better. Behind me, I heard Jimmy whimpering. Sean was trying to comfort Kevin, who was crying silently. These were good boys, brave boys, but they were just kids facing something out of nightmares. I'll make you a deal, I said. Single combat. Me against you. If I win, you let the boys go. The creature laughed, a sound like breaking glass. And if you lose, then you get what you want anyway. The pack leader studied me with those yellow eyes. You interest me, soldier. Most humans beg or run. You offer to fight. He nodded slowly. Very well. But when you fall, we too. Take them one at a time, slowly. I handed my flashlight to Tim. Whatever happens, you boys stay together. You help each other. That's what scouts do. The creature stepped into the circle of firelight, and I saw him clearly for the first time. He was massive. Not just tall, but built like he'd been designed for killing. His claws were longer than my fingers, his teeth designed for tearing flesh. But I'd been in the military. I'd trained boys like these for years, and I wasn't about to let a pack of monsters hurt kids on my watch. The fight was vicious and fast. The creature was stronger than any human, faster than should be possible. His claws raked across my chest, tearing through my shirt and into the skin beneath. I rolled away, grabbing a thick branch from our woodpile. He lunged at me again, and I swung the branch like a baseball bat. It connected with his skull with a crack like breaking bone. He staggered, snarling, yellow blood dripping from his muzzle. Behind you, Tim shouted. I spun just in time to see another creature leaping at my back. I dove sideways, but claws raked across my shoulder, spinning me around. The pack was cheating, but then again they were monsters. That's not fair, Dave shouted. And before I could stop him, he hurled a sharp rock at the creature that had attacked me. It hit the thing in the side, making it howl in pain and anger. Suddenly, all the boys were fighting. Sean threw rocks with deadly accuracy. Alex used his scout knife to stab at any creature that got too close. Even little Kevin was swinging a heavy stick, tears streaming down his face but refusing to give up. The creatures seemed confused by this. They were used to picking off isolated prey, not facing organized resistance. For a moment, the pack hesitated. That's when I made my move. I grabbed the burning end of a branch from our fire and drove it into the pack leader's jaw. Esteti, he screamed, a sound that was part howl, part human agony. and stumbled backward. "Fire!" I shouted to the boys. "They don't like fire." We grabbed burning branches and formed a circle, backs together, flames held outward. The creatures circled us, snarling, but they kept their distance from the fire. "You cannot burn forever," the pack leader said, clutching the wound in his chest. "We can wait." But as dawn approached, something strange happened. The creatures began to look transparent, like they were fading away. "Sunrise," the leader snarled. "But we'll return tomorrow night, and the next. We have all the time in the world." "No," I said, understanding flooding through me. "You don't. You're tied to this place, aren't you? Cursed to stay in these mountains forever." The creature's eyes flashed with rage, and I knew I was right. As the first rays of sunlight hit the rocks above us, the pack melted away like shadows, leaving only the smell of wet fur and old blood. We were alive. Hurt, terrified, but alive. We made it back to the ranger station by noon, 9 boys who'd left as children and returned as something else. I told the other rangers we'd had a wildlife encounter, a bear attack that had claimed 2 scouts. The boys backed up my story without being asked. Some truths are too big for official reports. Bobby Martinez and Randy Pierce were listed as missing, presumed dead due to exposure and animal attacks. Search teams found some torn clothing and enough blood to make the story believable. The boys' families grieved their sons, never knowing the real horror of what had happened. But the surviving boys knew. We all carried that knowledge like a weight in our chests. Tim Anderson went on to become an Eagle Scout and later a Marine officer. He wrote to me years later, saying the leadership skills he'd learned that night had served him well in combat. "Some fears you never forget," he wrote, "but some courage you never lose either." Dave Thompson became a teacher, working with at-risk kids in inner cities. Sean O'Connor joined the Park Service, just like me. Jimmy Holcomb surprised everyone by becoming a counselor who specialized in helping children deal with trauma. They all grew up to be good men, strong men who helped others face their fears. What happened to us in those mountains had marked them, but it hadn't broken them. As for me, I quietly recommended that dolly sods be restricted for youth groups under 18. Difficult terrain and dangerous wildlife conditions, I wrote in my report. The restriction was approved without question. I transferred out of West Virginia a year later, but I kept in touch with the other rangers in the area. Every few years, someone would report strange sounds from the deep wilderness, howls that didn't sound quite animal, tracks that showed signs of intelligence, campers who'd seen large wolves walking upright. The devil dogs were still there, still hunting, still bound to those mountains by whatever curse had created them. But they'd learned to be more careful. No more groups disappearing. Just single hikers now and then, people who'd wandered too far from the marked trails. I retired from the Park Service in 1995, but I still get letters from the boys, men now, with families of their own. Every July, around the anniversary, they write to tell me how they're doing. We don't talk about what happened directly, but we don't need to. We all remember. Last month, I got a letter from Kevin Liu, now a successful doctor in California. His son had just joined Boy Scouts and wanted to go on a wilderness camping trip. Kevin was asking for advice about safe places to take a group of kids. I wrote back with a list of beautiful camping spots in California and Colorado, places with good trails, clear water, and helpful rangers. Safe places where the only monsters are the ones in stories told around campfires. But I also included a warning. The same one I give to every parent who asks, Rust your instincts. If something feels wrong, if the woods go too quiet, if your kids report seeing things that shouldn't be there, get out. Get out fast and don't look back. Because sometimes the old stories are true. Sometimes there really are monsters in the deep woods, things that hunt in the darkness between the trees. And sometimes all that stands between them and innocent children is one adult who refuses to let evil win. The boys and I survived because we stood together, because we fought when fighting seemed impossible, and because we never gave up on each other. That's the real lesson of scouting, not just learning to tie knots or start fires, but learning to be the kind of person others can count on when everything goes wrong. The devil dogs are still out there in dolly sods, waiting in the shadows of those ancient mountains. But so are people like Tim, Dave, Sean, Jimmy, Alex and Kevin. Men who learned as boys that courage isn't the absence of fear, but the decision to protect others despite that fear. And maybe, in the end, that's enough to keep the monsters at bay. At least I hope it is. My name is Ezekiel Thornfield, but everyone calls me Zeke. I've been a park ranger in the Great Smoky Mountains for 23 years now, and I thought I'd seen everything these mountains could throw at a man. I was wrong. It was late October 1963, and the leaves were putting on their final show before winter. The maples blazed red as fire, and the oaks glowed golden in the morning sun. But there was something else in the air that morning. Something that made my coffee taste bitter and my hands shake just a little as I put on my ranger hat. The call came in around 7 a.m. A family of 4, the Caswells from Nashville, hadn't returned from their camping trip to Cataract Falls. They were supposed to check out yesterday, but their car was still parked at the trailhead. The folks at the ranger station wanted me to hike up and check on them. Now, Cataract Falls isn't your typical tourist spot. It's 8 miles from the nearest road, accessible only by a winding trail that'll test your legs and your lungs. Most families with young kids stick to the easier trails, but Bob Caswell had called ahead, asking specifically about camping near the falls. He said his kids, Amy and Tommy, were good hikers for being 6 and 9 years old. I packed my gear that morning with extra care. Something felt off, though I couldn't put my finger on what. Maybe it was how quiet the woods seemed, or how the birds weren't singing their usual morning songs. Or maybe it was the way the fog hung low in the valleys, thick as cotton, when it should have burned off by now. The hike to Cataract Falls takes about 2 hours if you know the trail like I do. I've walked it hundreds of times, teaching families about mountain safety, showing kids how to read the signs nature gives you. That trail holds a lot of memories for me. Some good, some that still wake me up at night. You see, I lost my own little girl, Sarah, 5 years ago. She was 8, with pigtails that bounced when she ran and a laugh that could make the gloomiest day bright. She drowned in a creek not far from here while I was working. I was supposed to be watching her, but I got distracted by some fool tourists who couldn't read a simple trail map. By the time I got back to the creek, it was too late. That's why I take families seriously now. That's why I never ignore a missing person report, even when it's probably nothing more than folks losing track of time. Children are precious things in these mountains. They can disappear faster than morning dew. As I hiked that morning, the fog seemed to follow me instead of lifting. The temperature was dropping too, which was strange. October mornings usually warmed up quick once the sun got going, but my breath was making little clouds with every step. About an hour into the hike, I started hearing something that made my skin crawl. At first, I thought it was just the wind in the trees, but as I got closer to the falls, it sounded more like singing. Children singing, far off and faint, like voices carried on the wind. I told myself it was just the water. Waterfalls make all kinds of sounds. Sometimes they roar, sometimes they whisper, sometimes they seem to talk. Old-timers around here have stories about Cataract Falls, stories I never put much stock in. They say children died there long ago, back when it was a logging camp, and their spirits still play in the water. Cherokee folks won't go near the place. They call it a place where water spirits steal the young ones. But I'm a practical man. I deal in facts and evidence, not ghost stories. Still, that singing sound followed me all the way up the mountain. I smelled the campfire before I saw the campsite. Wood smoke and something else. Breakfast, maybe bacon and eggs still cooking. That gave me hope. And maybe the Caswells had just overslept, lost track of time like campers sometimes do. But when I reached their camp, nobody was there. The tent was still up, nice and neat. 2 sleeping bags for the parents, 2 smaller ones for the kids, all laid out like they'd been slept in. Clothes were folded by each sleeping bag, little jeans and t-shirts for Amy, bigger ones for Tommy. Their hiking boots sat in a row outside the tent, clean and ready for the day. The camp stove was still burning. Eggs sat in the pan, overcooked and rubbery. Bacon burned black. Coffee in the pot had boiled down to thick, bitter sludge. I turned off the stove and looked around. "Hello?" I called out. "Mr. Caswell! Mrs. Caswell!" My voice echoed back from the trees, but no answer came. The woods were too quiet. No birds, no squirrels chattering, no insects buzzing. Just that strange singing sound from the direction of the falls, a little louder now. I checked the ground around the campsite. 4 sets of footprints led from the tent toward the falls, 2 adult, 2 child-sized. They were clear in the soft earth, heading down the narrow path that led to the water. But then I found something that made my stomach drop. Coming back from the direction of the falls was a different set of tracks. Small footprints, like children's feet, but they were going the wrong way. Instead of heading back to camp, they led off into the deep woods where no trail existed. And they were wet, soaking wet, like whoever made them had just stepped out of the water. I followed the wet prints for about 50 feet before they just stopped. Not like they walked onto hard ground where I couldn't see them anymore. They just ended, right there in the middle of a clear patch of dirt. "That's not possible," I said out loud, but my voice sounded small and scared. I went back to the campsite and called out again, louder this time. "Caswell family, this is Ranger Thornfield. If you can hear me, please answer." Nothing but that singing sound, which was definitely getting louder. I decided to follow the original racks toward the falls. The path was narrow and steep, winding down through thick trees and over moss-covered rocks. The wet footprints appeared again, but this time there were more of them, lots more. Dozens of small, wet footprints covered the path. Some looked fresh, some looked old, but all of them were the size of children's feet. They overlapped and crisscrossed, like a bunch of kids had been running back and forth on the trail. The singing was clear now, children's voices, high and sweet, echoing off the rocks. But I couldn't make out words, just melody, rising and falling like a lullaby. My hands were shaking as I reached for my flashlight, even though the sun was up. Something about those wet footprints, the way they seemed to multiply the closer I got to the water, made me want extra light. The trees opened up ahead, and I could see the falls. Cataract Falls drops about 40 feet into a clear, deep pool, then flows out through a rocky gorge. The water should have been making its usual thundering sound, but instead, it sounded like children singing. That's when I saw them. 2 small figures stood in the pool below the falls, water up to their waists. Even from a distance, I could tell it was Amy and Tommy Caswell. Amy's blonde hair was plastered to her head, and Tommy's red shirt was soaked through. They weren't moving, just standing there in the cold water, looking up at the falls like they were watching something wonderful. "Amy, Tommy," I shouted, starting to run down the steep path. "Get out of the water, it's too cold." But they didn't turn around, didn't even seem to hear me. As I got closer, I could see something was wrong with them. Their skin was too pale, almost white like milk, and they seemed fuzzy around the edges, like I was looking at them through old glass. The singing stopped. In the sudden quiet, I could hear my heart pounding and my bodum slipping on the wet rocks. I reached the edge of the pool, breathing hard. "Kids, you need to come out now," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "Where are your parents?" Amy turned. First, her eyes were completely white. No color at all, just white like fresh snow. When she smiled, I could see through her teeth. "We're playing," she said in a voice that sounded like it came from underwater. "Want to play with us, mister?" Tommy turned too, those same white eyes, that same see-through smile. "The water's nice," he said. "Real nice. Come play." I took a step back, my mind trying to make sense of what I was seeing. These couldn't be the Caswell children. The Caswell children were real, solid, alive. These things in the water looked like ghosts. I backed away from the pool, my mind racing. What I was seeing couldn't be real. Ghosts were just stories, things to scare kids around campfires. But those pale, see-through children in the water were looking right at me, smiling with teeth I could see through. "Come play," Amy said again, taking a step toward the edge of the pool. "We've been waiting so long for someone new." "The others are here too," Tommy added, his voice echoing strangely. "They want to meet you." That's when I saw them. More children rising up from the water like they were made of mist. They came up slowly, one by one, until there were 12 of them standing in the pool. All different ages, from maybe 5 years old to 12, but they all had those same white eyes and see-through skin. They were wearing old-fashioned clothes, dresses and overalls that looked like they came from 60, 70 years ago. Some had their hair in braids, others wore suspenders and caps, but they were all wet, dripping with water that never seemed to stop flowing. An older girl, maybe 12, stepped forward. She wore a long dress with puffy sleeves, and her dark hair hung in wet tangles around her face. "I'm Mary," she said in that underwater voice. "I take care of the little ones. We've been alone for such a long time. We just want to play," said a small boy in overalls. "Nobody ever wants to play anymore." I found my voice, though it came out shaky. "Where are the Caswell children? The real Amy and Tommy?" Mary tilted her head and water dripped from her hair. "They came to play with us yesterday. Such nice children, but they got scared and tried to leave." "Where are they now?" I demanded. "Safe," Mary said, "with their mama and papa, in our special place under the water where it's always warm." My blood turned to ice. "You mean they're playing forever now," said one of the smaller girls. "Just like us. Just like you can, if you want." I turned and ran. I crashed through the trees, branches tearing at my clothes and face. Behind me I could hear them laughing. Not mean laughter, but the kind of giggles kids make when they're having fun. That made it worse somehow. The wet footprints were everywhere now, leading in all directions through the forest. They seemed to glow faintly in the dim light under the trees. Some were small like Amy's, others bigger like Tommy's, but they were all heading away from the falls and deeper into the woods. I had to find the real Caswell family, had to find them alive. I followed one set of adult-sized prints that looked fresh. They led up a steep slope, over fallen logs and through thick bushes. The person who made them had been running, I could tell by how deep the heel marks dug into the soft earth. The trail led me to the edge of a steep drop-off that looked down into a narrow gorge. At the bottom, maybe 30 feet down, I could see something that made my heart sink. 2 bodies lay twisted on the rocks by the stream. A man in a red flannel shirt and a woman in jeans and a blue sweater. Even from up there, I could tell they were dead. Their necks were bent at wrong angles and dark stains spread out from under them. Bob and Helen Caswell. They must have been running from something, running so hard and so scared that they didn't see the cliff in time. But if they were down there, then what had happened to their children? A small hand touched my shoulder. I spun around and nearly fell off the cliff myself. Amy Caswell stood behind me, but not the ghost version from the pool. This was the real Amy, solid, warm, alive. Her clothes were dry, and her eyes were their normal brown color. "Mister," she said in a small voice, "can you help us? We can't find our mama and papa." Tommy appeared from behind a tree, looking just as real and solid as his sister. "We've been looking everywhere," he said. "The other kids said they knew where Mama and Papa went, but when we followed them, we got lost." I knelt down so I was eye level with both children. They looked scared and tired, but they were definitely alive and real. I could see the rise and fall of their breathing, could smell the wood smoke in their hair from the campfire. "I'm Ranger Thornfield," I said gently. "I'm here to help you. Where have you been since yesterday?" "The kids by the water wanted us to play with them," Amy said. "They were really nice at first. They showed us games and taught us songs. But when we said we wanted to go back to camp, they got sad. They said if we played with them forever, we'd never have to be scared or cold or hungry again," Tommy added. "But we wanted our mama and papa. The big sister Mary, she said our parents went looking for us. She said they fell down and got hurt, and now they're sleeping under the water where it doesn't hurt anymore." I felt sick. The ghost children had watched Bob and Helen die. Maybe they'd even caused it, leading them off the trail in the dark. "We have to get you out of here," I said, standing up. "Right now." But when I looked around, we weren't alone anymore. The ghost children surrounded us, rising up from the ground like mist. Mary stood directly in front of me, her see-through face sad but determined. "They can't leave," she said. "We need them. We've been so lonely." "Please," I said, triceps, and to keep my voice steady. "These children have to go home. They have family who loves them." "We had families too," said the little boy in overalls. "But we've been here so long we can't remember their faces anymore." "That's why we need new friends," Mary said. "Friends who will stay and play with us forever." The temperature dropped suddenly, so fast I could see my breath. Ice began forming on the trees around us, and frost spread across the ground at our feet. Amy and Tommy huddled against me, shivering. "It's getting cold, mister," Amy whispered. "I know, sweetheart," I said. "Just stay close to me." Mary stepped forward, and where her feet touched the ground, ice flowers bloomed. "You can stay too, Ranger Man. You look lonely. You look sad. We can take away all the sadness." For just a moment, I was tempted. The ghost children looked so peaceful, so happy, despite their pale faces and empty eyes. And I was tired of being alone, tired of carrying the weight of Sarah's death, tired of waking up every morning to the same guilt and grief. But then Tommy grabbed my hand with his small, warm fingers, and I remembered what I was supposed to do. Protect the children. Always protect the children. "No," I said firmly, pulling Amy and Tommy closer to me. "These children are going home." Mary's face changed, becoming angry and desperate. "You don't understand. We need them. Without new friends, we fade away. We become nothing but water and mist." "Then maybe that's what should happen," I said. The ghost children all gasped, and the temperature dropped even more. Ice began forming on my jacket, and Amy started crying from the cold. "You're mean," shouted the little boy in overalls. "We just want friends." "I know you do," I said, and I meant it. Looking at their pale, lonely faces, I felt sorry for them. But taking living children away from their families isn't playing. It was stealing, and it's wrong. "We don't know any other way," Mary said, and for the first time she sounded like the scared child she really was. "We've been here so long, we forgot everything else." "Then let me help you remember," said a new voice. I turned around and my heart nearly stopped. Sarah stood at the edge of the clearing. My little girl, my precious daughter, looking exactly like she had the day she died. Her pigtails bounced as she walked toward us, and her favorite pink dress was dry and clean. But unlike the other ghost children, Sarah glowed with a warm, golden light. "Daddy," she said, and her voice was full of love and joy. "I've been waiting for you." Tears streamed down my face. "Sarah? Baby, is that really you?" "It's me, Daddy. I came to help." She looked at the other ghost children with kind eyes. "I came to help all of you." Mary stepped forward suspiciously. "Who are you?" "I'm Sarah," my daughter said simply. "I drowned too, just like all of you. But I didn't get stuck here. I went to the light." "What light?" asked one of the smaller girls. Sarah pointed up, and for the first time I noticed a soft glow filtering down through the trees. It was warm and welcoming, like sunlight, but gentler. "The light that takes us home," Sarah said. "The light that takes us to where our families are waiting." "But our families are gone," Mary said sadly. "They died so long ago." "No," Sarah said. "They're waiting in the light. My mama is there, and my grandpa, and all the people who loved us. That's where we're supposed to go when we die, not stay stuck in one place, getting lonelier and sadder." The ghost children looked up at the light, hope flickering in their white eyes. "Will you show us?" asked the little boy in overalls. Sarah nodded, then looked at me. "But I need Daddy's help. Someone has to guide you to the light, someone who understands love and sacrifice." My heart broke as I realized what she was asking. "Sarah, no, I can't leave Amy and Tommy alone." "You won't be leaving them alone, Daddy. You'll be saving them. And I'll be saving us too." She gestured to the ghost children. "We've been trapped here so long because nobody was brave enough to help us cross over. But you're brave, Daddy. You're the bravest person I know." Amy tugged on my jacket. "What's she talking about, mister?" I knelt down and looked into her brown eyes. Alive, warm, real eyes. "Amy, I need you and Tommy to be very brave for me. Can you do that?" She nodded, though she was still shivering from the cold. "I want you both to close your eyes and count to 100. When you open them, you'll be safe. Someone will come find you and take you home." "But what about you?" Tommy asked. I looked up at Sarah, who was smiling at me with such love and pride. Then I looked at the ghost children, who had been trapped in this place for decades, stealing other people's children because they didn't know how to find peace. "I'm going to help some friends find their way home," I said. I stood up and walked toward Sarah. The ghost children gathered around us, their pale faces hopeful for the first time. "Are you ready, Daddy?" Sarah asked. I thought about all the children I'd helped over the years, all the families I'd guided safely through these mountains. This was just one more rescue, the most important one I'd ever do. "I'm ready, baby girl." Sarah took my hand, and suddenly I felt lighter than air. The warm light grew brighter, and I could see figures moving in it. Parents waiting for their lost children, families reunited at last. One by one, the ghost children stepped into the light. The little boy in overalls ran to a woman who swept him into her arms. Mary found a couple who held her close and whispered how much they'd missed her. Each child found their family, and their pale faces became bright with joy as they walked into the light. Sarah and I were the last ones. "Will I see you again?" I asked her. "Someday, Daddy, but not for a long time. You have more work to do first, more children to protect." She squeezed my hand. "I'm proud of you." The light grew brighter and brighter until it was all I could see. The search team found me 3 days later, sitting peacefully by Cataract Falls with Sarah's photograph clutched in my hands. Dr. Morrison said I'd died of a heart attack, probably brought on by the stress of the rescue. He said it looked like I'd just sat down by the water and quietly passed away. Amy and Tommy were discovered safe and unharmed 2 miles downstream, sleeping under a big oak tree. They had no memory of the ghost children or their parents' death. Amy remembered playing by the water, and Tommy remembered getting lost in the woods, but everything else was fuzzy, like a half-remembered dream. They were adopted by Helen's sister and her husband in Nashville. From what I heard, they grew up happy and healthy. Tommy became a teacher, and Amy became a nurse. Sometimes they visited the mountains, but never Cataract Falls. Something deep inside them remembered that place wasn't safe. The falls themselves changed after that day. The Cherokee elders said the water spirits finally found peace. Local folks noticed that the sound of the falls went back to normal, just the natural rush of water over rocks, no more singing voices. But sometimes, if you know what to listen for, you can still hear something in the water. Not the sad songs of trapped children, but happy laughter drifting up from the light that shines beneath the surface. The laughter of children who found their way home at last. And sometimes, on quiet mornings when the mist rises from the pool, people say they can see a ranger in an old-fashioned uniform standing by the water. He's watching over the place, making sure no more children get lost or scared, making sure they all find their way safely home. The Park Service put up a memorial plaque by the falls. It reads, "In memory of Ranger Ezekiel Thornfield, who gave his life protecting the children of these mountains, and in memory of the 12 children lost in the flood of 1890, who finally found their peace." Families still hike to Cataract Falls, but now they bring their children safely home every time. The water spirits don't steal the young ones anymore. They don't need to. They're not lonely anymore. My name is William Grayson, but everyone calls me Bill. I've been a park ranger for 19 years now, and I thought I'd seen everything these West Virginia mountains could throw at me. I was wrong. It was November 1967, and the whole state was buzzing about the new bridge they were building over the New River Gorge. After what happened in Korea, I'd made it my job to keep people safe. That war taught me what happens when things aren't built right. Bridges fall, people die, and you carry that weight forever. The limp in my left leg always gets worse when it's cold, and that Tuesday morning was no different. The temperature had dropped to about 45 degrees, and fog was rolling up from the river like smoke from a campfire. I was driving my truck up the winding service road to the construction site when the radio crackled. "Bill, you there?" It was Mike O'Brien, the construction foreman. Good man, 20 years in the business. "Yeah, Mike. What's the problem?" "We got some weird stuff happening up here. Workers are spooked. Found some, I don't know what to call them, big scratches in the steel beams. And Tommy Mason swears he saw something with wings bigger than a plane." I sighed and pressed the radio button. "Probably just an owl, Mike. You know how stories grow around here." "Maybe, but can you come take a look? The boys won't work until someone official checks it out." I'd grown up near Point Pleasant, about 40 miles north. Been hearing crazy stories about some Mothman creature for weeks now. People claimed they saw a giant bird thing with glowing red eyes. Newspapers were having a field day with it. But I knew better. Mass hysteria. Probably started by someone who saw a barn owl in the dark. The construction site was something to see. The new bridge would be almost 900 feet long when finished, stretching across the gorge like a giant's arm. Right now, it was just half built, with massive steel towers reaching up into the gray sky. The whole thing looked like the bones of some prehistoric beast. I parked near the work trailers and grabbed my flashlight and inspection gear. Mike came jogging over, his hard hat slightly crooked and worry lines creasing his face. "Thanks for coming, Bill. Look, I've been doing this for 20 years. Never seen anything like what's happening here." He led me toward the base of the South Tower. Started 3 days ago. First, all the birds disappeared. Not just a few. I mean, every single bird. Haven't seen a crow, sparrow, nothing. Then the equipment started acting funny. Funny how? Electronics going haywire. Radios picking up voices speaking backwards. Temperature gauges showing impossible readings. And the guys, he lowered his voice. 3 of them had the same dream. They all dreamed the bridge collapsed with cars full of families falling into the water. We stopped at the base of the tower. The steel beams rose up like a ladder toward the clouds. And there, about 30 feet up, I could see what Mike was talking about. Deep gouges in the metal, like something with massive claws had gripped the beam. "Could be from the construction equipment," I said, but even I didn't believe it. The scratches were too clean, too deliberate. They looked almost purposeful. That's what I thought at first. But look at this. Mike pointed to a section of beam that hadn't been painted yet. In the bare metal, there were scratches that formed a pattern. It looked almost like a warning symbol, or maybe wings. A cold wind picked up, making the unfinished bridge groan like a living thing. Somewhere in the distance, I heard what sounded like a low, mournful cry, like a train whistle, but deeper and more lonely. "There it is again," Mike whispered. "Been hearing that sound for 3 days. Always comes from up there." He pointed toward the top of the tower, where the steel beams disappeared into the low-hanging clouds. I adjusted my hard hat and checked my safety rope. "Well, only one way, to find out what's making your boys nervous. I'm going up." The climb up the bridge tower was harder than I expected. My war injury always made my left leg unreliable, and the steel beams were slippery from the morning fog. Each step up took me further from the solid ground and deeper into something I didn't understand yet. About 50 feet up, I stopped to catch my breath. The construction site looked small below me, like a toy set. Mike and a few workers were standing around watching me climb, their faces turned up like pale dots. The river ran dark and quiet far below. That's when I noticed something strange about the steel beam I was gripping. It was warm. Not just a little warm from the sun. There was no sun today. It was warm like something alive had been wrapped around it. I clicked on my radio. "Mike, you there?" "Yeah, Bill. How's it look up there?" "The steel beam is warm. That normal?" Long pause. "No, Bill, it's 45 degrees out. Steel should be cold as ice." I kept climbing. At about 80 feet, I found something that made my blood run cold. Wrapped around one of the crossbeams was what looked like a giant molt, the shed skin of something with wings. It was bigger than any bird skin I'd ever seen, much bigger. The wind picked up again, and I heard that cry, closer now, and definitely not a train whistle. It sounded almost intelligent, like something trying to speak but not knowing how to form words. That's when I saw the eyes. About 20 feet above me, perched on a beam like it belonged there, was something that shouldn't exist. At first glance, it looked like a man sitting hunched over, but as my eyes adjusted, I realized it was much bigger than a man. And it had wings. The creature was maybe 8 feet tall, with massive wings folded against its back. Its skin looked gray-black, like old leather. But the eyes, God, those eyes, were what froze me in place. They glowed red like hot coals, and they were looking right at me. We stared at each other for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. The creature didn't move, didn't threaten me. It just watched. And somehow I got the feeling it was trying to tell me something. Then images started flashing in my head. Not like memories, more like someone was showing me a movie. I saw the Silver Bridge in Point Pleasant, the one I'd helped inspect just last month. In the vision, the bridge was falling apart, cars sliding off into the icy river, people screaming, families trapped in sinking cars. The images came faster. I saw this bridge, the one I was hanging from right now, with cracks spreading through the support beams. I saw workers falling. I saw the whole structure coming apart like a house of cards. "No," I whispered, shaking my head to clear it. "It's just stress. Too many stories about that Mothman thing." But when I looked up again, the creature was gone. Just vanished, like it had never been there at all. I climbed down as fast as I could, my hands shaking on the steel rungs. Mike was waiting for me at the bottom, along with Tommy Mason and a couple other workers. "Well?" Mike asked. "Find anything?" I wanted to tell them about the warm steel, about the molt, about the creature with red eyes. Instead, I said, "Found some bird signs. Probably a large owl nesting up there. Nothing to worry about." Tommy Mason stepped forward. He was young, maybe 25, with the kind of eager face that reminded me of the soldiers I'd served with in Korea. "Mr. Grayson, I know you think we're all crazy, but I saw something up there yesterday. Something big with wings and red eyes. It didn't try to hurt me or nothing, just looked at me, but when I looked into those eyes..." He paused like he was trying to find the right words. "I saw things. Bad things happening to bridges. People dying." The other workers nodded. One of them, an older guy named Eddie Morrison, spoke up. "Had the same kind of vision, Mr. Grayson. Saw bridges falling down like dominoes. Started with one up north, then spread south, like something was trying to warn us." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the November air. "What did you see exactly? In the vision?" Tommy and Eddie looked at each other. Eddie answered first. "The Silver Bridge in Point Pleasant. Saw it clear as day. Cars backed up in rush hour traffic. Then the whole thing just folded up like a broken toy. Must have been 40, 50 cars that went into the water." "When?" I asked, though part of me already knew I didn't want to hear the answer. "December," Tommy said quietly. "Middle of December, right around rush hour on a busy day." The wind picked up again, making the unfinished bridge sing like a giant harp. And somewhere up in the steel beams, I heard that cry again, mournful and urgent, like something trying very hard to warn us about something we couldn't understand. 3 days later, I couldn't get those visions out of my head. I'd called my buddy Jim, who worked bridge inspection up in Point Pleasant, but he'd just laughed when I mentioned checking the Silver Bridge again. "Bill, we inspected that bridge 6 months ago. It's solid as a rock. Been standing for 40 years. But the dreams wouldn't stop. Every night I closed my eyes, I saw the same thing. The Silver Bridge folding up like a broken umbrella, cars sliding into the icy Ohio River, and always, somewhere in the dream, those red eyes were watching. I was back at the New River construction site on Friday morning when things got worse. Mike O'Brien met me at the gate, and I could tell by his face that something bad had happened. "We lost a man yesterday," he said without any greeting. My stomach dropped. How? Eddie Morrison. Remember him? The older guy who said he had visions? Mike rubbed his face with both hands. Found him at the bottom of the gorge yesterday evening. Looks like he fell from the bridge. I shake. Ident? Mike shook his head slowly. That's the weird part. Eddie was scared of heights. Wouldn't go higher than the first platform, maybe 20 feet up. But we found him way down in the rocks, like he'd fallen from the top of the tower. We walked toward the bridge site. The workers were standing around in small groups, talking in low voices. I could feel the fear in the air like electricity before a storm. There's more, Mike continued. Before he died, Eddie came to my trailer around lunchtime. Said he had something important to tell me. Said the creature with red eyes had shown him exactly when the silver bridge was going to fall. When? December 15th, 5 o'clock in the evening, rush hour. I stopped walking. That was less than 3 weeks away. Mike, did Eddie seem... was he acting strange? Like maybe he was having some kind of breakdown? That's what I thought at first. But then he showed me this. Mike pulled a piece of paper from his jacket pocket. It was a detailed drawing of the silver bridge with red X marks on specific support beams. Below the drawing, in Eddie's handwriting, were calculations, stress loads, metal fatigue rates, traffic weights. Eddie wasn't an engineer, Bill. He was just a construction worker. But these calculations, I had our project engineer look at them. They're perfect. Eddie somehow knew exactly which parts of that bridge were weakest. A cold wind blew up from the river, carrying with it that lonely cry I'd heard before. Several of the workers looked up nervously at the bridge towers. It's been getting worse, Mike said, following my gaze. Ever since Eddie died, the thing up there has been more active, more urgent, like it's running out of time to tell us something. That afternoon, I climbed the bridge again. This time, I was prepared. I brought a camera, a tape recorder, and my service pistol. Though I doubted bullets would do much good against something that could vanish into thin air. I found the creature perched on the same beam as before, about 100 feet up. It was bigger than I'd remembered. Definitely 8 feet tall, with wings that had to span 15 feet when open. But again, it didn't seem threatening. It just watched me with those burning red eyes. Then the visions came again, stronger this time. I saw the silver bridge so clearly I could read the license plates on the cars. I saw a green pickup truck with a Christmas tree tied in the back. I saw a school bus full of kids coming home from a basketball game. I saw a young mother in a blue coat holding a baby. And I saw the exact moment when the bridge failed. A single support cable snapped first, then another. Then the whole suspension system came apart like a zipper opening. The roadway folded up like a drawbridge, and all those cars, dozens of them, slid backward into the dark water. When the vision ended, I was on my knees on the steel beam, crying like a child. The creature was still watching me, and somehow I understood that it was crying too. That evening, I called every official I could think of. The State Highway Department, the Bridge Authority, even the governor's office. I told them all the same thing. The Silver Bridge was going to collapse on December 15th, and people were going to die. Nobody believed me. How could they? A park ranger claiming a giant bird creature was sending him visions of disaster? They probably thought I was crazy. Maybe I was crazy, but the visions kept coming, and they were getting more detailed. I could see individual faces now, hear voices, even smell the river water. And always, somewhere in each vision, those red eyes were watching, begging me to find a way to make people listen. December 15th was only 5 days away when everything changed. I'd been calling the Point Pleasant Bridge Authority every day, begging them to at least inspect the Silver Bridge one more time. They'd stopped taking my calls. That's when Dr. Patricia Hoffman showed up, at the construction site. She was the chief engineer for the new River Bridge project. A smart woman about 39 years old with gray-streaked hair and the kind of no-nonsense attitude you get from 20 years in a man's profession. I'd met her a few times during the early planning stages, and she'd always struck me as someone who dealt in facts, not fantasies. "Mr. Grayson," she said, walking up to where I stood near the bridge tower. "Mike O'Brien tells me you've been having concerns about bridge safety in general." I could hear the skepticism in her voice. Dr. Hoffman, I know how this sounds, but... She held up a hand. Let me finish. I've been reviewing some calculations that were found in Eddie Morrison's belongings. Mathematical projections about metal fatigue and stress loads on suspension bridges, specifically the Silver Bridge. My heart started beating faster. And? The calculations are correct. More than correct, they're brilliant. They show exactly how an aging suspension bridge could fail under certain conditions. She paused, studying my face. The thing is, Eddie Morrison had an 8th grade education and no engineering training. So how did he know things that should have taken a team of engineers weeks to calculate? I looked up at the bridge tower where I knew the creature was watching us, even though I couldn't see it from here. Dr. Hoffman, what if I told you that Eddie Morrison wasn't the only one having detailed visions about bridge failures? What if I told you that something was trying to warn us? She followed my gaze upward. I'd say that's impossible, but I'd also say that Eddie's calculations deserve investigation. She pulled out a radio and keyed it. This is Dr. Hoffman. I need to speak with the chief engineer at Point Pleasant Bridge Authority. Emergency consultation. Over the next 2 days, Dr. Hoffman worked around the clock. She drove up to Point Pleasant and personally inspected the Silver Bridge. She found hairline cracks in 3 main support cables, exactly where Eddie's calculations had predicted they would be. She found metal fatigue in the tower attachments. She found corrosion patterns that matched the failure sequence from my visions. But the bridge authority wouldn't close the bridge. Too much traffic, too much economic impact. They agreed to schedule a full inspection for the following week. That'll be too late, I told Dr. Hoffman when she called with the news. How can you be so certain about the timing? She asked. I couldn't tell her about the creature, about the red eyes, about the visions. Instead, I said, the calculations Eddie left behind weren't just about what would fail. They included when. The bridge is going to collapse on December 15th at 5:07 p.m. There was a long silence on the phone. Finally, she said, That's in 2 days, Mr. Grayson. Even if I believed you, what could we do? That night, I climbed the bridge tower one last time. The creature was waiting for me, perched on the highest beam like a judgment angel. When I looked into its red eyes, the vision that came was different from the others. This time, I saw myself. I was standing at the Point Pleasant end of the Silver Bridge on December 15th, holding a police radio. Cars were backed up in rush hour traffic, just like in all the other visions. But in this vision, I was stopping traffic, turning cars away, saving lives one vehicle at a time. When the vision ended, the creature opened its massive wings and let out that mournful cry, but this time it sounded almost hopeful. I understood. I couldn't convince the authorities to close the bridge, but I could be there. I could try to save whoever I could. Dr. Hoffman agreed to help. She couldn't officially close the bridge, but she could be there with documentation, with evidence, with authority that people might listen to. We drove up to Point Pleasant on the morning of December 15th, carrying Eddie Morrison's calculations and her inspection. Reports. At 4:30 p.m., we parked at the Point Pleasant end of the Silver Bridge. Rush hour traffic was just starting to build up. Dr. Hoffman set up a roadblock using orange cones and official signs claiming emergency inspection in progress. It wasn't legal, but it might work long enough to matter. At 5 p.m., I saw the creature. It was perched on the bridge's main tower, visible to anyone who looked up. Its red eyes were blazing like warning flares. Several drivers pointed and stared, but they kept coming. At 5:05 p.m., Dr. Hoffman's radio crackled with angry voices from the bridge authority demanding to know who had authorized the roadblock. At 5:07 p.m., exactly when Eddie's calculations had predicted, I heard the sound I'd been dreading, the sharp crack of a cable snapping under too much weight. The Silver Bridge collapsed at 5:07 p.m. on December 15, 1967, exactly as the visions had shown. But because of our roadblock, only 9 cars were on the bridge instead of the 40 or 50 that should have been there during rush hour. 31 people still died that day. The water was so cold and the current so strong that most couldn't be rescued. But Dr. Hoffman and I had saved dozens of others by turning them away from the bridge in those final minutes. The creature, The Mothman appeared one last time as rescue workers pulled the last survivors from the icy Ohio River. It perched on a light pole near where I stood, and for just a moment, our eyes met. In that glance, I felt something I'd never experienced before, the gratitude of something ancient and powerful, something that had been trying so hard to warn us. Then it spread those massive wings and flew south, back toward the mountains. The New River Gorge Bridge construction resumed 3 months later after every beam, every cable, every bolt had been re-inspected and many had been replaced. Dr. Hoffman used Ed de Morrison's calculations to develop new safety protocols that are still used today. I kept working as a park ranger for another 15 years, but I was different after that December. Evening. I learned to pay attention to things other people dismiss. Strange animal behavior, unusual weather patterns, that feeling when something just isn't right. And sometimes, maybe once or twice a year, I'd catch a glimpse of red eyes watching from a mountain ridge or a bridge tower, always just before some kind of disaster, a mine collapse, a mudslide, a dam failure. The Mothman never appeared to me directly again, but I came to understand that it was still out there, still trying to warn people who might listen. The workers at construction sites throughout West Virginia know me as the safety inspector who takes every concern seriously, no matter how strange it sounds. They call me the man who listens to the mountain's warnings. Some think I'm a little crazy, but nobody argues when I tell them to stop work and check their equipment, because I learned something that cold December day in 1967. Some things exist beyond our understanding, but that doesn't make them our enemies. Sometimes the monsters are trying to save us from ourselves. Sometimes when the wind is right and I'm working alone in the mountains, I still hear that mournful cry echoing between the peaks. Not scary anymore, just lonely. The sound of something ancient watching over us, trying to keep us safe from the disasters we create with our own hands. The Silver Bridge was rebuilt within 3 years. It's a beautiful modern structure with safety systems Eddie Morrison could never have calculated. But sometimes, late at night when traffic is light, drivers report seeing red eyes reflected in their rearview mirrors as they cross the river. I tell them the same thing I tell everyone who asks me about the Mothman. Pay attention to the warnings. They come in all forms: strange dreams, animal behavior, equipment failures, and sometimes in the shape of something with wings and burning red eyes. Lista. Enter the mountain. It's trying to save your life. The Point Pleasant Silver Bridge collapse was a real disaster that occurred exactly as described on December 15, 1967, killing 46 people. The Mothman sightings in the Point Pleasant area were also real, reported by dozens of witnesses in the months leading up to the bridge collapse. This story is a work of fiction inspired by those actual events. My name is Rebecca Ashworth, but everyone calls me Becca. I've been a forest ranger for 12 years now, and I'm still the only woman in this whole district. That February of 1984, I was stationed at the Pine Mountain Lookout in Daniel Boone National Forest, Kentucky. It's a lonely job, especially in winter, but I love it. The quiet, the snow-covered trees, the way the mountains roll on forever like frozen waves. I should have known something was wrong when the animals started acting strange. The deer stopped coming to the salt lick, the birds went quiet, even the squirrels seemed to vanish. But I was too busy watching the weather reports to pay much attention. The storm hit on February 12th, and it was a monster. The Weather Service called it the worst blizzard in 50 years. 3 feet of snow, winds howling at 40 miles per hour, and temperatures that dropped to 15 below zero. The kind of cold that makes your teeth ache and your lungs burn. My radio crackled to life around noon. "Becca, you there?" It was Carl Henderson, the veteran ranger who worked dispatch. His voice sounded worried. "I'm here, Carl. Storm's getting bad up here. Got a problem. Mining survey team went missing yesterday. 5 guys from Blackstone Mining, doing surveys up in the old Pine Ridge area. Last radio contact was around sunset." I knew the area. Old coal mines from the 1930s, abandoned after the big disaster that killed 43 miners. Most of the buildings were still standing, rotting away in the forest like broken teeth. They might have taken shelter in the old mining camp, I said, watching snow pile against my window. Smart thing to do in this weather. That's what I'm hoping. But the storm's got all the roads blocked, no way to get a truck through, and helicopters can't fly in this wind. You're the closest ranger to that area. I looked out at the white wall of snow. The wind was so strong it made my little station shake. Carl, I can't even see my own truck right now. I know, just keep your radio on. If the storm lets up, we might need you to check on them. But the storm didn't let up. It got worse. By evening, the power went out. My backup generator kicked in, but I knew I only had enough fuel for maybe 2 days. The propane heater kept the main room warm, but the wind found every crack and gap in the walls. Ice started forming on the inside of my windows. That's when I heard it for the first time. A sound like screaming, but not quite human. It could have been the wind. Wind can make all kinds of crazy noises in a storm, but something about it made my skin crawl. I checked my supplies. Enough food for a week, maybe more, if I was careful. Water wasn't a problem, plenty of snow to melt. But the cold was getting worse, and my radio was full of static. Around midnight, the screaming sound came again. Closer this time. I grabbed my flashlight and looked out the window, but all I could see was swirling snow. The wind had carved strange shapes in the drifts around my station. For a moment, they almost looked like people. I told myself I was being silly. 12 years in these mountains, and I'd never seen anything worse than a hungry bear or a lost hiker. Whatever was making that noise was probably just some animal caught in the storm. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. Really wrong. The storm finally started to calm down the next morning. The wind dropped to maybe 20 miles per hour, and I could see more than 10 feet in front of me. My radio crackled back to life. Becca, thank God. You okay up there? I'm fine, Carl. Generator's still running. What's the word on those miners? Nothing good. Their families are worried sick. I need you to check the old mining camp if you can manage it, but be careful. The snow's deep, and more storms are coming. I bundled up in my warmest gear and started up my snowmobile. The machine had chains on the treads, and it could handle deep snow, but the going was slow. What should have been a 20-minute ride took over an hour. The old Pine Ridge mining camp sat in a valley between two ridges. Most of the buildings had collapsed years ago, but the main office and a couple of worker houses were still standing. As I got closer, I could see smoke coming from the chimney of the biggest house. That gave me hope. Smoke meant fire. Fire meant people. The survey team had made it to shelter. But when I reached the camp, something felt off. There were tracks in the snow all around the buildings, boot prints that looked fresh. But they were strange. Some were normal human footprints, but others were longer, deeper, like someone walking on their toes. And they were spaced too far apart, like whatever made them had been running. I knocked on the door of the house with the smoking chimney. Hello? Forest Service? Anyone in there? No answer. The door was unlocked, so I pushed it open. The inside was warm. Someone had gotten a fire going in the old stone fireplace. There were sleeping bags spread out on the floor, empty food cans on a makeshift table. But no people. Hello? I called again. Then I noticed the food. Beans and stew in metal cups sitting on the table next to the fire, still warm. Steam was rising from them. Someone had been here just minutes ago. I found signs of the survey team everywhere. 5 sleeping bags, 5 sets of gear, maps spread out on the table with the Pine Ridge area circled in red. But where were the people? That's when I heard it. Voices outside, shouting. Panicked voices. I rushed to the window and looked out. 5 men were running through the snow, heading away from the camp toward the old mine entrance. Even from a distance, I could see the orange safety vests that mining surveyors wear. Hey! I shouted, but they were too far away to hear me over the wind. I grabbed my radio. Carl, I found them. 5 men aiding toward the old mine shaft. They're running like something's chasing them. But something was chasing them. I saw them then, moving through the snow behind the running men. Pale shapes too tall to be human, moving faster than anything should be able to move in 3 feet of snow. They didn't seem to sink into it at all, just glided over the surface like ghosts. One of the running men fell. The pale things were on him in seconds. I couldn't see exactly what happened through the swirling snow, but his screams cut through the wind like a knife. The other 4 men reached the mine entrance and disappeared inside. The pale things followed them. I stood there for a moment, my heart pounding. What the hell had I just seen? Becca! Becca, come in! Carl's voice on the radio snapped me back to reality. I'm here. Carl, there's something wrong up here. Really wrong. I don't know what I saw. Are the miners okay? I looked toward the mine entrance. It was just a black hole in the side of the mountain, boarded up with old planks that had rotted away over the years. I don't think so, Carl. I think we need help. Big help. Storm's getting worse again. No way to get anyone up there until tomorrow at the earliest. You need to get back to your station and wait it out. But as I started back toward my snowmobile, I heard something that made my blood freeze. It was coming from inside the mine. Screaming. Human screaming. And then suddenly, it stopped. I couldn't just leave. Those men might still be alive in there, might need help. Against my better judgment, I grabbed my emergency medical kit and headed toward the mine. The entrance was bigger than I'd thought. The old boards had been torn away recently, probably by the survey team looking for shelter. But as I got closer, I could see they'd been torn from the inside, not the outside. Long gouges in the wood, like claw marks. I clicked on my flashlight and stepped inside. The mine tunnel stretched ahead into darkness, with old rail tracks still running down the middle. The air was cold, but not as cold as outside. It smelled of rust and something else, something rotten. Hello? I called. Forest Service. If anyone's in here, call out. My voice echoed off the stone walls, but there was no answer. I followed the tracks deeper into the mine. The beam of my flashlight showed more claw marks on the walls and something that looked like dried blood. Old blood, dark and crusty. About 50 yards in, I found the first body. It was one of the surveyors, still wearing his orange vest. But something had torn him apart. I've seen bear attacks, mountain lion kills, but this was different. Worse. Like something had been trying to get inside him. I fought down the urge to throw up and kept going. I had to find the others. The tunnel split into 3 branches. I took the middle one and almost immediately found another body. This one was older, not from the survey team. The clothes were rotted, but I could make out the remains of old mining gear, from the 1930s maybe. But that was impossible. After 50 years, there shouldn't be anything left but bones. I heard a sound ahead, a scraping noise, like fingernails on stone. I clicked off my flashlight and listened. The sound came again, closer. Something was moving in the darkness ahead of me. I turned my light back on and saw it. It had been human once. You could tell by the basic shape. Arms, legs, head. But it was all wrong now. Too tall, maybe 7 feet. Skin that was white as snow and seemed to glow in my flashlight beam. Its eyes were completely black, and when it opened its mouth, I could see teeth that were too sharp and too many. It looked at me for a moment, tilting its head like a dog hearing a strange sound. Then it smiled. I ran. Behind me, I could hear it following. Not running, something worse. It was laughing, a sound like breaking glass. I made it to the mine entrance and stumbled out into the snow, my snow mob. Al was still there, thank God. I jumped on and hit the starter. The engine turned over on the 3rd try, and I gunned it toward my station as fast as I could go. But they were following me. I could see them in my mirrors. Pale shapes moving through the trees, keeping pace with my snowmobile like it was standing still. There were more of them now. At least 6, maybe more. They looked like the thing in the mine, but different. Some were missing arms or had extra limbs. Others were bent at wrong angles, like they'd been broken and healed crooked. But they all had those same black eyes and 2 sharp teeth. One of them got ahead of me somehow and stepped into my path. I had to swerve hard to avoid it, and my snowmobile went sideways into a tree. The engine died. I was maybe half a mile from my station. In the deep snow, that might as well have been 10 miles. The pale things surrounded me, moving in slowly like wolves around wounded prey. Up close, I could see details I wished I couldn't. Their skin wasn't just pale, it was translucent. I could see dark veins underneath, and their breath came out in clouds of steam that smelled like rotting meat. The biggest one stepped forward. It was wearing the rotted remains of old mining clothes, and around its neck was a tarnished metal tag. I could just make out the words, Pine Ridge Mine, Thomas Morrison, 1934. These things had been the miners, the ones who died in the disaster 50 years ago. But they weren't dead. Not exactly. Thomas Morrison opened his mouth and spoke. His voice was like wind through broken glass. "Hungry," he said. "So hungry." I ran for my life. I made it to my station just ahead of them. The door had a good solid deadbolt and the windows were small and high. It wasn't much, but it was better than being caught in the open. I grabbed my radio as the first of them reached the door. Carl, come in. Emergency!" The radio crackled with static. "Becca, what's your situation?" "I'm under attack. There's something up here. Something from the old mine. I think they killed the survey team." "Attack? What kind of attack?" Outside, they were testing the walls, looking for weak spots. I could hear them scratching at the foundation, trying to dig underneath. The sound of their claws on stone made my teeth ache. "I don't know what they are, Carl. They look human, but they're not. They're from the mine disaster, I think, from 1934. "Becca, you're not making sense. The mine disaster was 50 years ago. Everyone died." "That's just it. They didn't die. Not really. One of them found my generator outside. The lights flickered and went out. My propane heater was still working, but barely. I found my emergency lantern and clicked it on. In the dim light, I could see shapes moving past the windows. They were tall enough that their heads almost touched the bottom of the glass. "How many men are you dealing with, Becca?" I counted the shapes I could see. At least 8. Maybe more. Something heavy hit my door. The whole building shook. "Carl, I don't think they're men anymore. I think they're something else." "Okay, listen. I'm going to try to get help up there, but it might take time. You need to hold out until morning." Morning was 8 hours away. Another impact on the door. This time I heard wood crack. I looked around my station for anything I could use as a weapon. My rifle was in my truck, which might as well have been on the moon. But I had some emergency supplies, flares, a small axe, and something that might work. Mining charges. Small ones, left over from when they'd cleared a rock slide on the access road last year, enough to blow a hole in solid rock. The door was starting to give way. I could see pale fingers reaching through the cracks, trying to widen the gaps. I set up the charges near the door and windows, then retreated to the back room with the detonator. If they broke in, I'd blow the whole front of the building. It would probably kill me too, but maybe it would stop them. "Still hungry?" came a voice from outside. Thomas Morrison. 50 years hungry." The door exploded inward, and they poured through the opening. 6 of them, maybe 7, moving faster than anything human should be able to move. I hit the detonator. The explosion lit up the night like a miniature sun. When the smoke cleared, the front half of my station was gone. So were 3 of the pale things, or at least they were scattered in pieces across the snow. But the pieces were still moving. The remaining 4 circled around to the back of the building. I grabbed my axe and waited. They came through the window all at once. I don't remember much about the fight. It was dark, and everything happened fast. The axe felt good in my hands. Solid. Real. I'd split a lot of wood over the years, and these things weren't much different. They bled black blood that steamed in the cold air, and when I hit them, they screamed like rusty hinges. But they kept coming. Even with arms or legs cut off, they kept trying to get at me. It was like they couldn't feel pain, couldn't get tired, couldn't die. I was backing toward my last resort, the propane heater, when I heard the sound of engines outside. Snowmobiles. A lot of them. "Becca!" Carl's voice shouting over the noise. "Where are you?" The pale things heard it too. They stopped attacking and tilted their heads, listening. Then all at once they turned and ran. Not toward the sound. Away from it. Back toward the mine. Carl found me sitting in the ruins of my station, covered in black blood and shaking from cold and shock. With him were 5 other rangers and a paramedic. Jesus, Becca, what happened here? I told them about the survey team, about the things from the mine. They listened with the kind of polite attention you give to someone who's been through trauma and might not be thinking clearly. The official report said I'd fought off a pack of rabid wolves that had killed the mining survey team. The explosion was explained as a propane leak caused by the animal attack. Case closed. But Carl pulled me aside before I left for the hospital. Becca, I've been working these mountains for 20 years. I've heard stories about the Pine Ridge mine. Old-timers say the disaster wasn't an accident, say the miners got trapped during a bad winter and, well, they did what they had to do to survive. I looked back toward the mine. In the morning light, it just looked like a hole in the rock. Nothing special, nothing dangerous. What are you saying, Carl? I'm saying maybe some things are better left buried. I'm putting that whole area off limits. Unstable mine shafts, danger of collapse. No one goes up there without my permission. They gave me a commendation for heroism and a promotion to district supervisor, but I put in for a transfer to Florida. Someplace warm, where the winters don't last so long and the mountains don't hold such old secrets. I never went back to Pine Ridge, but sometimes, on quiet winter nights, I still hear that sound, like screaming, but not quite human. And I remember the words Thomas Morrison spoke. Still hungry. Some hungers, I think, never die.